Good morning. I'm Cristina Recalde from the Communications Division here at the IDB. I welcome everyone joining us today, both here in person and those connecting virtually. This event will be conducted in English, but we offer simultaneous interpretation into Spanish and Portuguese. Aware of both opportunities and challenges that artificial intelligence presents for better regulation, and building on the strategic partnership with Portugal, the institutional capacity of the State Division here at the Inter-American Development Bank presents the event AI for Better Regulation, Challenges and Opportunities in Latin America and the Caribbean, which brings together experts and practitioners to explore how to design and implement effective AI strategies in regulation. To begin this event, I am pleased to welcome Ana Maria Ibañez, IDB's Vice President for Knowledge and Sectors, and Pedro Carneiro, Deputy Head of Mission, Embassy of Portugal in the United States. I would now like to invite Ana Maria Ibañez to the podium.
Good morning, everyone. It's really a pleasure to have you all here at the Inter-American Development Bank. Over the next 2 days, we will have the opportunity to bring together public officials, academics, private sector representatives, and international organizations to think about how artificial intelligence can help us regulate better. Many governments have made important progress in regulatory improvement and administrative simplification. More countries now have modern regulatory frameworks, regulatory impact assessment systems, and digital platforms that bring the state much closer to citizens. But we still have a central challenge: designing regulatory improvement tools that are aligned with the real needs of public officials, tools that can scale, automate processes, and do so efficiently and sustainably. In many cases, technical teams know what to do and what is needed to be improved, but they do not always have the structured data, interoperability, or analytical capacities to work at the scale modern governments require. And this is precisely where artificial intelligence opens up an extraordinary opportunity. It allows us to organize, analyze, and understand complex regulations, and above all, to make evidence-based decisions. At the IDB, we use AI to identify, for example, vulnerable areas for building more resilient infrastructure and to design better social programs, among many other things. Today's tools have enormous potential to transform sectors such as health and education. AI applied to regulation, what we call AI for better regulation, is transforming the way governments design, implement, and evaluate their rules. Many of these practices will be featured in the conference panels today and tomorrow. We will learn from experiences ranging from the use of AI to simplify procedures and reduce regulatory costs, to its application in smart supervision, automated enforcement, and regulatory impact analysis. And we will discuss use cases from different countries. We have some examples that are interesting. In South Korea, for example, the Reg Navigator system helps regulators visualize interactions among thousands of legal provisions and anticipate regulatory conflicts. In Brazil, the Ministry of Development, Industry and Trade, with IDB support, is developing a regulatory trade calculator and an AI-based tool to simplify processes and measure administrative burdens. In Germany, the National Statistics Institute is using AI to analyze the economic impacts of regulation and support decision-making with high-quality data. In Mexico, the National Banking and Securities Commission has developed subtech tools that significantly increase the efficiency and effectiveness of anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism regulations, strengthening supervisory capacity. And in Chile, the National Commission for Evaluation and Productivity is advancing the use of AI to identify and quantify regulatory costs that affect competitiveness and innovation. In fact, they came here a few months ago to present us with their example. All of these initiatives have something in common. None of them seek to replace regulators. They aim to strengthen their capacities. Artificial intelligence does not replace human judgment, it enhances it. It helps us build governments that are smarter, more analytical, and more proactive. At the IDB, we believe and firmly believe that AI can be a transformative lever for public management. That is why we are promoting a regional agenda for the use of AI in regulatory policy based on three main pillars. The first one is structuring regulatory data to turn the body of regulations into usable, machine-readable information. The second one is interoperability among regulators to avoid duplication and promote shared use of data, and this is very important. Development of AI-based tools such as regulatory cost calculator, simplification systems, and smart compliance platforms. This agenda seeks to strengthen institutional capacity across the region, promoting public sector innovation and technical cooperation as drivers of more efficient, transparent, and citizen-centered regulation. We want to advance toward a shared agenda for Latin America and the Caribbean, a roadmap that combines technological innovation, data, and public governance. We hope these 2 days will be an opportunity to share real-world experiences, identify pilot projects, and build a regional community of practice on AI and regulation. To close, I would like to thank the IDB team who is here, the Embassy of Portugal and the Government of Portugal for making this event happen, and all the panelists and persons that are going to participate throughout the 2 days. AI is a fast-moving world that is evolving rapidly around us. The challenge for Latin America and the Caribbean is not to prepare in the traditional sense. AI really does not wait. The challenge is to stay in the conversation, connect to the global networks where innovation is happening, and move at the same pace. This means having agile frameworks, high-quality data, modern infrastructure, and spaces to experiment and learn continuously. The essential thing is not to fall out of the flow, to understand the technology as it unfolds and to capture value to maximize development. These events are opportunities to join forces. I invite you to make the most of these 2 days, to debate, to learn from one another, to build networks, and to imagine together how artificial intelligence can help us regulate better, reduce unnecessary burdens, and ultimately improves people's lives. Welcome to the IDB, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Ana Maria, for your intervention. I would now like to invite Pedro Carneiro, Deputy Head of Mission, Embassy of Portugal in the United States, to the podium, please.
Okay. So good morning. Buenos dias. Bom dia. So my name is Pedro Carneiro. I'm from the Embassy of Portugal. I will do my speech in Portuguese. So if you need translation, grab your machine back there. Senhora Vice-Presidente Ana Maria Ibanhas, minhas senhoras e meus senhores, é uma grande honra dizer algumas palavras de abertura em nome do Governo de Portugal, como financiador desta conferência. Gostaria primeiro de agradecer ao Banco Interamericano de Desenvolvimento e à Divisão de Capacidade Institucional do Estado pela organização deste evento tão oportuno e com visão de futuro. E especialmente à Vice-Presidente Ana Maria Ibanhas e à sua equipa pela sua liderança na promoção da agenda de inovação e reforço institucional. O meu muito obrigado. Minhas senhoras e meus senhores, o Banco Interamericano de Desenvolvimento está a dar um passo decisivo na promoção da inovação regulatória na América Latina e nas Caraíbas. Esta conferência assinala um marco importante no lançamento de uma agenda estratégica para apoiar os governos na utilização da inteligência artificial para melhorar a regulação, desde a simplificação de procedimentos até ao reforço da supervisão e da capacidade institucional. Portugal orgulha-se de apoiar esta iniciativa e de ter estabelecido uma parceria sólida com países da região, no sentido de explorar formas de colocar a inteligência artificial ao serviço de uma regulação mais eficaz e de uma governação mais robusta. Continuamos disponíveis para explorar novas vias de cooperação com o Banco e com os países da região, através de parcerias técnicas, intercâmbio de conhecimento e esforços conjuntos de inovação. Gostaria de vos falar brevemente de como Portugal encara a inteligência artificial e a governação digital. Portugal está, neste momento, a afirmar-se como líder europeu na utilização responsável e estratégica da inteligência artificial na administração pública. Esta liderança reflete uma ambição mais ampla: construir um Estado que sirva os nossos cidadãos com eficiência, transparência e justiça. Repito, eficiência, transparência e justiça. E que seja capaz de se adaptar às exigências da era digital. O país, Portugal, está atualmente a finalizar a sua agenda nacional para a inteligência artificial, que é ou que está estruturada em 4 pilares estratégicos. Primeiro, talento. Segundo, inovação. Terceiro, investigação. E quarto, infraestruturas. E esta agenda está plenamente alinhada com a Estratégia Nacional para a Digitalização. Entre as suas iniciativas mais emblemáticas, destaca-se o Amália, o primeiro modelo de linguagem desenvolvido em português de Portugal. O Amália representa o compromisso de Portugal com a soberania digital, a inclusão linguística e a inovação nos serviços públicos, permitindo aplicações de inteligência artificial mais acessíveis e eficientes em toda a administração pública. Portugal assume também a presidência do grupo D9+, D9+, uma coligação de Estados-membros da União Europeia reconhecidos como líderes na transformação digital. É a primeira vez que Portugal assume esta função, num momento-chave para reafirmar o seu compromisso com a modernização da administração pública e com a construção do futuro digital europeu. Como afirmou recentemente o Ministro Adjunto e da Reforma do Estado de Portugal, Gonçalo Matias, cito: "Vivemos um momento decisivo. Pela primeira vez, a tecnologia não é apenas um instrumento do Estado. É uma força que o obriga a repensar-se. A inteligência artificial está a redesenhar a economia, a gestão pública e, inevitavelmente, a própria ideia de governação." Fim de citação. Esta visão sustenta a abordagem estratégica de Portugal à inteligência artificial. Construir um Estado preditivo, inteligente e transparente, capaz de prestar melhores serviços e tomar decisões mais informadas. Uma das primeiras e mais promissoras iniciativas nesta área é o projeto IA2IA, desenvolvido pelo Plan APP, Centro de Competências de Planeamento, Políticas e Prospectiva da Administração Pública. E esta iniciativa serve para apoiar a verificação automatizada da avaliação do impacto legislativo e a comparação de alternativas legislativas. O projeto promove a utilização de inteligência artificial para estimar custos administrativos e melhorar a qualidade e a eficiência da análise regulatória. Com base neste trabalho, o Plan APP associou-se à Universidade Nova para desenvolver o projeto IA4IA@EU, financiado pela Comissão Europeia. Esta ferramenta de prova de conceito utiliza processamento de linguagem natural para identificar encargos administrativos em textos legais, tendo alcançado uma precisão superior a 76%. Está atualmente a ser considerada para uma aplicação mais ampla na administração pública portuguesa. Aliás, uma apresentação dedicada a este projeto está prevista numas sessões do programa de hoje. Este trabalho pioneiro serviu de base técnica e conceptual para os modelos posteriormente aplicados em projetos piloto, já aliás também referidos aqui, apoiados pelo Banco no Brasil e no Paraguai. São cofinanciados pelo Fundo Português de Cooperação Técnica junto do Banco Interamericano de Desenvolvimento e desenvolvidos com o apoio de especialistas portugueses. Estes projetos incluíram atividades de capacitação e cooperação técnica para adaptar ferramentas de inteligência artificial à avaliação de impacto legislativo. Estes projetos demonstram como, aliás, a inteligência artificial pode reduzir encargos, pode melhorar a tomada de decisão e pode reforçar as instituições, mesmo em ambientes regulatórios particularmente complexos. Destacam também a importância do envolvimento contínuo e inclusivo dos stakeholders, do rigor metodológico e da utilização estratégica da inteligência artificial para melhorar os processos regulatórios. Adicionalmente, refletem também o valor das parcerias internacionais na tradução da inovação em reformas práticas e que são adaptadas aos contextos locais e tendo por base experiências globais. Esta experiência de Portugal mostra que o sucesso da inteligência artificial na regulação depende não apenas da inovação tecnológica, mas também da robustez institucional e da qualidade do envolvimento dos stakeholders. Num mundo que é cada vez mais ágil, mais interligado, as instituições públicas, as nossas instituições públicas, devem ser capazes de responder com clareza, rapidez e propósito. Esta capacidade é particularmente relevante em muitos países da América Latina e das Caraíbas, onde a reforma regulatória pode desbloquear potencial económico e reforçar a confiança democrática. A inteligência artificial pode ser, portanto, um poderoso catalisador de políticas públicas mais transparentes, eficientes e baseadas em evidência. Mas o seu impacto depende de processos inclusivos, metodologias claras e um compromisso partilhado com o valor público. À medida que os países da região avançam neste percurso, Portugal, reafirma aqui, está disponível para partilhar a sua experiência e também aprender com os outros, contribuindo para um esforço coletivo de modernização das nossas governações através de uma utilização responsável e estratégica da inteligência artificial. Minhas senhoras e meus senhores, para concluir, gostaria de sublinhar que esta conferência representa, de facto, um momento na definição do futuro da governação regulatória na América Latina e nas Caraíbas. E, portanto, aproveitemos este momento não apenas como um ponto também de viragem tecnológica, mas como um compromisso cívico com a construção de instituições mais ágeis, inclusivas e responsáveis. E utilizemos também esta oportunidade para consolidar parcerias duradouras, parcerias para o futuro, para trocarmos conhecimento e para desenvolvermos soluções práticas que tornem a regulação mais eficaz, transparente e ajustada às necessidades das nossas sociedades. Terão em Portugal um parceiro empenhado e sólido e com o qual podem contar. Desejo a todos uma conferência produtiva, uma conferência inspiradora e que abra novos caminhos para o futuro. Muito obrigado pela vossa atenção.
Thank you, Pedro Carneiro, for your intervention. It is my pleasure now to introduce to you our keynote speaker, Cari Coglianese, Edward B. Shields Professor of Law, Director of the Penn Program on Regulation at the University of Pennsylvania, for the keynote conference, Algorithm versus Algorithm, AI and the Future of Regulatory Government. And I also welcome Emilio Pineda, Manager of the Institutions for Development Department at the IDB, who will be moderating this event. Please, if you can join me on stage. While they set up on stage, I wanted to let you know that at the end of the keynote, we'll have a Q&A session, so please feel free to prepare your questions and share them then. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning to everybody. It's really a pleasure. It's an honor to be here. Just let me give a couple of reflections before giving the floor to Professor. As Ana Maria, our Vice President, already mentioned, the regulatory quality agenda is of particularly relevance for the IDB. And why this is the case? Well, this is the case because it's very important for the economic impact that it has in our economies and societies. Excessive regulation reduces investment and competition. Regulatory burdens discourage formality and competition. The complexity of regulations and the lack of transparency facilitate corruption. And all of these have very significant and meaningful impacts in our region. For example, different numbers show that regulatory reforms focus on greater openness and competitiveness in services in our region could increase the productivity between 4 and 15% in different countries. Also, better regulation could reduce delays, for example, in customs administrations that could save almost 5 percentage points of GDP. Therefore, there are a lot of gains to be earned if we improve our regulations. However, for this to happen, we need to have an institutional capability. We need to have a bureaucracy that is capable of delivering better regulations and do at least 4 main things. First, it needs to prioritize ex-ante analysis before issuing regulations, for example, consultation processes and prior reviews. Second, we need to incorporate the analysis of competition distorting regulations into the activities of competition authorities. Third, we need to strengthen data generation and interoperability frameworks among regulators. And fourth, we need to conduct frequent regulatory cleanup and stock-up management exercises. And to do this, AI is a capability that is not going to substitute the regulators, but it's going to enhance the capabilities and the ability of our regulators to do this. It's going to be a very significant complement. And it is in this context that is my pleasure to welcome Professor Coglianese. Professor Coglianese is one of the most recognized global experts in administrative law and regulatory governance. A professor at the University of Pennsylvania Carey Law School, he is the founder of the Penn Program on Regulation and author of more than 300 publications on regulatory analysis, public participation technology, and the use of AI in the public sector. Throughout his career, Professor Coglianese has advised organizations such as the U.S. Administrative Conference, the EPA, the Department of Transportation, Environment Canada, and the OECD. He has also chaired committees of the National Academy of Sciences and contributes actively to initiatives on transparency, innovation, and regulatory excellence. Professor Coglianese is also the creator of the Regulatory Review and the founding editor of the journal Regulation and Governance. His work combines academic rigor, institutional leadership, and a profound contribution to contemporary debates on how to improve regulation to address the economic, technological, and social challenges of the 21st century. Professor, it's a pleasure to have you here, and the floor is yours for your opening reflections.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. I thank you for that warm and kind introduction. And thank you all for being here in person, and thank you for those of you who are watching online. Welcome. I'm going to talk about algorithm versus algorithm, the future of regulatory governance and AI. And my main contribution here actually stems from and builds on work that I've been doing for really over 20 years now. Although I've been writing about AI and regulation rather intensively for the last 8 years or so, if one goes back to a paper that I wrote in 2024, now 20 years ago, on e-rulemaking, we're talking about, and in that context, here on the left, tools for improving the efficiency of the work that regulators do that you're going to be talking about throughout the day today. It's a field that in one sense is moving very fast, but in another sense, we are just starting in the world of regulation to take full advantage of the technology and how it's been developing. The key question for regulators in this space, I think, is, as was suggested, when to use AI to either complement or substitute for human decision making as officials develop regulations, implement regulations, enforce regulations. And this answer is simple, and this is going to be my message. When AI performs better, that's the algorithm versus algorithm. The current algorithms versus those that can be digitized and performed through machine learning and other digital algorithmic functions. Let's just take a simple algorithm that we have today. It's reflected in the page of a page and a provision in the U.S. Code of Federal Regulations. It says that no one can be licensed as a commercial airline pilot if they have reached the age of 65 or older. That's an algorithm. It's a simple one, and the rule books we have today are filled with algorithms like this. But what do we know about these kind of algorithms? Well, they can be effective, but they can also be sometimes over-inclusive or under-inclusive. Just going back to 2009, there was a major incident in which a commercial aircraft, a U.S. Airways airplane, had both of its engines lost because of waterfowl going into the engines. They lost both of the engines. And this person here, Chelsea Sullenberger, known as Sully, was able to land the plane on the Hudson River in New York. An incredibly, incredibly difficult and risky, but ultimately successful maneuver on his part, saving the lives of everyone on that aircraft. Now, he did that when he was actually nearing that retirement age. And what do we know? We know that when you set rules like things that have thresholds, sometimes people who are below that threshold, in the case of age restrictions, might not be as safe or as qualified as those people who perhaps even are older than it. There is something from experience. So let me just say we should imagine. It won't happen today, and it's not going to be the type of tools that any of you are going to start to talk about probably being implemented today. But somewhere in the next decade, 2 decades or so, we're going to have the opportunity to have algorithmic regulation, where instead of putting a rule in the rule books that says you can't be a pilot if you are over 65, instead we have an AI system that captures all your data on training flights and educational history, other aspects of you, and makes a forecast. And assuming we can get that tool to be well calibrated and well validated, that may do a better job of making sure we have the folks like Sully flying airplanes and not others in a way that's better than we can do with our current almost sometimes crude algorithmic systems. So think about a world in which this is what a rule looks like, much more than the words and on a page on a book. That's a vision for far into the future. Now, we actually do have some examples of artificial intelligence as regulation today. It's a very simple regulatory system, but it's the traffic signaling system. And in major US cities, we have artificial intelligence systems that are structured in a way that are designed to help promote the optimal flow of traffic throughout the city. And it's algorithms, machine learning algorithms, black box algorithms that are determining whether a particular traffic light is turning red when it turns red or goes green when it goes green. No one really can say for sure why at any particular time the light goes red or green. But for anybody on a street at that time, that is a rule. That is a rule. And this is being driven by an AI system today. Now, I know that's a very simple example, but it is happening today. And I think this vision of AI ultimately as substituting for the kind of rules we have today is more likely. We know that just the last couple of weeks, Albania announced Diela, who is going to be the apparently the world's first minister of procurement in Albania. That's purportedly going to be AI based. We don't know exactly yet what Diela will do, but the Albanian government has had a lot of corruption with government contracting, and they think that by automating their systems and using procurement technology, procure tech that's AI based, that they may well do better than their current system. Again, algorithm versus algorithm. Now, just to start off, what are we talking about with artificial intelligence? There's going to be probably throughout the course of the day today, lots of different terms from predictive analytics, large language models, neural networks, machine learning. All of these are words that are encompassed within artificial intelligence. And it's important to just be aware that in conversations like we have today, there will be probably lots of different terms that are put forward. I do want to make three key distinctions, though, in the technology. A distinction between digitization, automation, and artificial intelligence. And keep those in mind. Digitization just means putting government documents, putting laws and regulations into digital form. And in the US, we've seen this happening since the late 1970s, where our corpus of laws have been digitized at the federal level. There's still a lot that is in actual paper form, but once we can get it online, it's digitized. That's different from automating. And here I think of a popular tax software like TurboTax or various legal software that help somebody create a will online. These are automated functions, and these are important too. And I think Diela, by the way, will have a lot of automation for people to go online and through simple forms be able to put forward a bid for simple government contracts. That's going to be automated, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's artificial intelligence. We've got a lot of software out there that's being developed. It's more of a if-then form than the use of these neural networks and machine learning algorithms. Those are ones in which the software is designed to search through large volumes of data and detect patterns and to make forecasts. And essentially that's how these large language models that we're all familiar with, ChatGPT and Claude, for example, are operating, is they're taking a simple language string and trying to predict what would be the most sensible or the most likely word that would follow. So it's pattern detection and forecasting that is happening through an algorithm that's been given a particular objective, and then through a complex process trying to make those forecasts. There's a relationship between all of these. You can't have either automation or artificial intelligence until you have digitization. And for a lot of governments around the world today, they're still at the digitization stage. So the sooner those digitization can happen, the sooner then we can move to either automation or artificial intelligence. The artificial intelligence needs digitization because that's the source of data that will be processed and the patterns will be searched for. But again, you can have automation without artificial intelligence, and you can have artificial intelligence that supports and is integrated into automated systems, or is simply outside of it, augmenting human processes where humans are still very much in the loop. And a lot of regulatory applications today will be of that non-automation kind. Now, speaking of uses today, I wanted to just sort of give you a sense for where we know we're at here in the United States with respect to the incorporation of artificial intelligence into our administrative processes, into our regulatory processes. Back in 2020, a study that was done by a team of researchers at Stanford and NYU, one of the NYU participants in this study and leads in this study, Professor Sharkey, is here with you today, and maybe you'll have a chance to talk with her about that study. Found across the entire federal government in the United States about 150 or so use cases of real machine learning, not automation, but not digitization, but real use of machine learning or artificial intelligence. I've been working on a project now for the last several years in which we're trying to actually see how this is changing perhaps over time. And as of the end of last year, we've found over 3,000 use cases at the federal level here in the United States. We're taking advantage of an inventory that agencies are supposed to keep of their AI uses, as well as some broader types of searches. What can I tell you about this? Well, there's 5 main areas that we've been coding and following the Stanford NYU lead as well in this regard. We've been capturing and coding our use cases into 5 different areas. The first is in research. So for example, when the US Commerce Department wants to try to figure out where there might be opportunities for promoting US business abroad, they need to do some research on that, and they're using artificial intelligence tools for that. Enforcement, a lot of agencies that are regulatory are using AI tools to support enforcement. Almost every enforcement agency in the US, and I'm sure this is the case everywhere in the world, has far fewer inspectors and auditors than they have regulated entities. So there's always a choice, a difficult one, about where do you send your auditors and your inspectors. And if you can use AI tools, you can you can target those, maybe make better forecasts for those firms that are more likely to be violating the law and use those enforcement resources more wisely. The Transportation Security Administration is using an AI tool for those purposes. The Securities and Exchange Commission is using it. Lots of agencies are doing that. With respect to public services and engagement, we see some use of AI here. So even though Albania has Diela, which is the name given to a chatbot that Albania had developed, we have a chatbot in the US at the federal level to help people who want to apply for student loans. It's called Aiden, I guess because it's a pun on federal student aid. So they chose a name called Aiden to help answer people's questions, members of the public's questions about student aid. There's a lot of uses for internal management. The Department of Health and Human Services has been using AI tools for processing large volumes of documents. That's certainly a task that applies in the regulatory context. And there's been some use to support adjudication. The Social Security Administration in the US has used AI tools to help support quality control in overseeing the work that its adjudicators are doing in determining whether someone gets benefits or not under the Social Security program. If you look at how these things break down and compare the breakdown from the 2020 study to the 2024 study, this is how they compare. The red area is the top most use, research. This is an important internal function. The second is internal management, again, by its nature, internal. And third is enforcement. And again, with enforcement, it's often this triaging. What's interesting is that the top 3 uses for AI at the federal level today is to help federal agencies do the work that they need to do: research, internal management, and enforcement. It's actually right now a small fraction that are of AI uses that are deployed for public engagement or for adjudication. One might ask, by the way, is the 3,000 use cases that we find as of the end of last year just the result of better reporting and accounting for AI that's been used for a long time in agencies, or are we actually seeing an increased use? Well, one way of getting some leverage on this is that sometimes agencies are reporting when they started using these AI tools, and for a subset of all the 3,000 uses where we have data on when the uses were started, we do see that over time the use is indeed increasing, as one would expect. And by the way, I think the 3,000 that we have is probably an understatement. Since the end of 2024, we have these large language models being used much more widely. Any government employee on their desktop probably is using AI in a way that's just not something we can capture in our data. So, but nevertheless, there's actual increased use going on. Why is that? Why all this interest in AI? I think we should just be clear. Algorithm versus algorithm. The human algorithms that have driven governmental decision-making and processes up until now are subject to a wide variety of limitations and foibles that have been well documented. Physical limitations in memory and fatigue, biases, intrinsic biases and cognitive biases, and a host of group decision-making problems as well. So if we can remember that the choice facing regulators and administrators today is not whether AI is perfect, but whether it's better than these existing processes that are subject to these limitations. AI then has some positive possibilities. It can, and it has been demonstrated, to improve accuracy in decision-making. It can increase capacity for processing much more data, building, especially if it's built into automated systems. We can do more essentially with less, or at least with fewer people. We can do things faster, and arguably we can do things more consistent. If one had some centralized process that was with one algorithm as opposed to something that's distributed across hundreds or thousands of individual human officials, you have the potential for achieving greater consistency. The demonstrated capacities of AI can be easily reflected in how these large language models are performing. So when ChatGPT was first introduced at version 3.5 to the public in November of 2022, it was tested on the uniform bar exam for lawyers, and it failed. It performed at the 10% level, but just about 6 months later, when ChatGPT 4.0 was released, it passed, and passed at the 90th percentile level. For those of us in law schools, we paid a real attention to that. That's an amazing. We train our humans for 3 years, and they study for a summer for this exam, and that's how ChatGPT performed. One study looked at how lawyers versus AI tools could spot legal issues in a series of contracts. They performed about the same. The AI tools found 92% of the issues that the human experts found. A comparison group with average lawyers found 85%. That's roughly comparable, but here's what's amazing. The average time for the humans to perform this task was 92 minutes. 92 minutes, and guess how long it took the AI tools? 26 seconds. Amazing, amazing. And we see this, by the way, in a variety of other governmental contexts. The performance of what might be called special purpose AI, not these large language models, but AI tools that are built for special purposes. Greek border officials during COVID were able to use an AI tool to identify asymptomatic people who had COVID but weren't displaying any symptoms before they got onto airplanes. They could identify them through an algorithm 2 to 4 times greater than any humans could. There's a study that shows that the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency could identify 600% more violators of water pollution regulations than currently if they used an artificial intelligence tool. If governments used AI to predict in domestic violence cases those individuals that are more likely to reoffend, AI tools can improve that identification by 50%. But I don't want to sugarcoat things. There are concerns about AI. You need, again, data availability. That digitization is important, and that's not always there. Garbage in can be garbage out. There's cybersecurity concerns, privacy risks, transparency and explainability becomes an issue, especially when governments are using these AI tools. If they don't necessarily provide a clear reason or explanation, that's a concern for members of the public. There are questions about the bias. Often that bias is coming from the human data on which these algorithms are trained, granted, but nevertheless, that can be reflected in AI tools. And some of these large language models have been hallucinating and giving wrong answers. They're getting better in this regard, but that's still happening. So AI can be a very powerful tool, but I think it can be easily oversold too. And here in the US, we're seeing that AI is being held up as the way forward to eliminate 50% of all of our regulations at the federal level, or at least having that possibility. I think it's important when you hear claims like this to just be clear about what's at stake and be realistic too. One thing to be clear about is that this claim is based not on actual elimination of what in the US we would think of as a full regulation, a final rule that appears in the Federal Register, but individual sections of our code. And the claim is that there could be an elimination of about half of those sections through AI tools. It's important not to become unthinkingly reliant on AI tools. The same entity that's making the claims about AI being a path toward 50% reduction of regulations in the US, DOGE, the Department of Governmental Efficiency, has sought to do other things with AI tools, like eliminate contracts dealing with gender or diversity, equity, inclusion, and finding that they're flagging contracts and programs that deal with things that have words related to equity, like a program that was designed to build equity in people's savings, for example, or eliminating from a government website a reference to the Enola Gay, the name of a plane that dropped the bomb on Hiroshima, or taking pages out of the tax manual where it said we're dealing with the inclusion of a taxpayer identification number. Have to be aware about unthinking reliance here. And also have to be careful about AI being overconfident. This is akin to what I often, by way of reference, think about as the taxi driver phenomenon. Everybody go into a taxi and you can ask a taxi driver a question about anything happening in the world, big world affairs, big policy decisions, and by golly, the taxi driver has a really clear answer for you about what needs to be done, right? And AI can sometimes do that too. And an example here, again from DOGE here in the US, is that they were trying to eliminate unnecessary contracts in the Veterans Administration for medical care, and they just used basically a ChatGPT to try to examine just actually the first 2,500 words of contracts and see if they really were necessary at all for patient care. And they ended up flagging a large number of valuable programs dealing with gene sequencing for cancer and improving the quality of nursing care. And this was so problematic that the person who developed this tool, and he developed it in just one day, by the way, was interviewed later and said, you know what, no one really should run my code and just do what it says. He says, it reminds me, if you were to rely on it, as this one episode in the television show The Office, where the main character relies on his GPS to turn right because he thinks that's what the GPS is telling him to do, and he goes straight into a lake, even though he could see the lake, by the way. He says, do not drive into the lake, in the words of Sahil Lavigna, the DOGE programmer who developed that software. Let me bring us home to thinking about regulatory simplification. And I just would urge us to think about substantive simplifications over superficial simplifications. So eliminating redundancy in a regulatory corpus sounds good, right? Nobody's here favoring that. And if you were to say, delete all the references in a set of regulations that mirrored those in a set of statutes, or if you're thinking about this in terms of primary legislation and secondary legislation, there's some duplication. And you could make the secondary legislation or the regulations shorter and simpler by just eliminating those repetitions and redundancies. But on the other hand, you may make that secondary legislation or those regulations a lot less user-friendly without doing anything substantively to actually lessen legal regulatory obligations. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. And these could be things that at the US level, if we're looking at trying to use AI tools to eliminate unnecessary sections within the Code of Federal Regulations, that we end up doing without really making much of a difference. For example, one statute defines commerce in a certain way, the regulation uses that same statutory definition, the regulation under that same statute, to define commerce. Well, you could get rid of it in the regulation, saying it's duplicative, but you haven't really changed the legal obligations. Here's a statute dealing with advisory committees that says what should be in a charter for advisory committees that are formed by agencies. And so different agencies, and I've just given you two, have put into their regulations what should be in their advisory committee charters. And it mirrors what's in the statute. So again, you could eliminate all of that, but you haven't really changed much of anything. Lastly, just here's a table that appears in our Code of Federal Regulations, which details all the civil penalties that appear across all of our environmental laws. It's a summary. It's actually helpful. You get rid of it. You've eliminated some duplication. Maybe you've simplified, but you've actually maybe made things worse. Do not drive into the lake with these things. So when to use artificial intelligence to improve regulatory governments? It's when it's going to perform better than the alternative, the status quo, which is usually human-based. So 3 sets of factors to consider as we wrap up here in answering the question of when to use AI. First, think about what are the preconditions for using AI. You're going to need to know what it is you want to use it for. And especially for special purpose, but even I think for these large language models, you have to have a very clear goal in mind. You have to have that digitization and data availability, and that data has to be somehow relevant and have some external validity to the problem at hand. You have to actually achieve improved outcomes. The goals have to be achieved. You have to test, evaluate, validate, and then verify that the goals are indeed being achieved. But you also have to be aware that there may be other impacts that are occurring on those that are directly affected by the AI, and make sure that those side effects aren't occurring. And there may be side effects or broader societal impacts. For example, before actually really going to an algorithmic regulation of who gets to be a commercial airline pilot, you want to make sure it really works, because the people on the planes need to make sure that there's really going to be safety. And lastly, think about the risks to the regulator. And this is going to be a function, I think, of the degree to which the AI is substituting for humans. AI can be just an input into human decision making. It could create a default that can be overridden by humans, or it could be making those decisions itself. And the more you move along those lines, the greater the risks. And there's also stakes. An AI tool to help determine where an IT department within a regulator needs to go to help answer employees' AI questions doesn't have a lot at stake in the same way that automating who gets to be an airline pilot would be. And when you put these things together on a 2x3 matrix here, you think about low stakes and the high stakes. If there's low stakes and there's not really direct replacement of human decision making, there's probably a little less scrutiny that's needed. But when you're over on the bottom row here and over farther on the right, where the stakes are high and the AI tool is doing more, you should be more careful. So lastly then, so the key steps for AI success are the 4 Ps: planning, and again, that's going to be adjusted, and you're going to need more planning, more validation, more testing, more quality assurance. The more important this tool is in a decision-making process, and the greater the stakes. Think about your people. Getting familiar with AI, knowing what the tools are doing, not being too over-reliant or overconfident about them, being careful, skeptical, scrutinizing. Being at events like this is one way of promoting people and the importance of their knowledge. A lot of times governments don't have the in-house capacity to use AI or to develop these tools, so procurement comes into play here. Be aware of that and make sure your contracts are giving you the information you need to be transparent about the uses, to be able to show the public or show legislators how the tool is being used. There have been instances where contractors that build these tools say, sorry, everything's trade secrets. You can't get any information about that. And that puts the government in a really difficult situation. And lastly, think about public participation. Get input from the public about these tools and how they're being used and how they're being designed, whether they're satisfying all the goals that really ought to be considered. The Boston Public School District some years ago used AI tools to redesign the bus schedule to take children to school. And they optimized, and they came up with a great plan to reduce the amount of fuel consumption for buses and have them go in routes that were much more efficient. The only problem was, it was not at all what parents were counting on because of what it did to the hours of the day and when their children would be coming home. Participation is really important. In conclusion, it's, though, a time of great possibility. These tools can really improve on human performance, and governments have an obligation to explore those possibilities. And when it can be shown that AI algorithms, digital algorithms, perform better than the status quo human algorithms, that's when governments would do well to start implementing and using these tools. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carrie. I think it was a fascinating presentation. We're going to have a dialogue with the public, but let me start with one question. I would like for you to elaborate a little bit more on this, on how the regulators in the region that are planning to use AI can navigate these trade-offs that you were talking about. So there's a possibility, there's a promise of providing better services, having better regulations through the use of AI. But there's also risks and a lot of apparently necessary conditions that need to be in place for this to be successful. So, and at the same time, you mentioned that governments have the duty, the obligation of explore, making use of AI to benefit. So for those, if you were to advise those regulators in the region on that are already exploring or are thinking about exploring, incorporating AI into their day-to-day business, what would be the key three necessary recommendations or the necessary aspects that they should be thinking right from the beginning to navigate these trade-offs?
Well, first of all, the irony is that even though we're here talking all day today about technology, it's ultimately people that matter. In designing this technology, in deploying this technology, in evaluating this technology. So we have to build up our human capital. Now, the last federal administration in the US had Executive Order 14110 that had Section 10 that was all about building up the capacity in the federal government in the US, the human capital to use AI tools. That executive order has been revoked, but the new AI action plan of the new administration also emphasizes people in its own way. And I think that's at base. And that's why these kind of gatherings, the work that the IDB is doing here to bring people together for collective learning, mutual learning, continuous learning and improvement, really important. Build up that human capital. So that's number one. I guess the second one is, second point is really don't be afraid to explore these tools. Don't be afraid just because they may have problems. But the third would be don't be also too cavalier about it. Don't just think that you can pull something off the shelf, plug it in, and you can suddenly lay off 100 people, or you can suddenly reduce regulatory costs by $1 bazillion or whatever. you have to find a balance. You have to trust, but verify. You have to really make sure that you're getting what you expect from it. And that's why people are so important. In another context, when thinking about regulating the private sector use of AI, have said we need to get away from this language, the imagery that we can put up guardrails to protect the public. But what we really need is to think about ensuring that the uses of AI are on an effective leash. A leash is something that's flexible. It allows the technology to explore. And that's one way of finding this balance, is letting it go forward, find the improvements. There's a lot of possibility here, but don't let it go off and meander all on its own, because it might, that's when we get into problems. Keep it on a leash.
Perfect. Now we're going to go to have some questions. We have here, and then on the back. Thank you. If it's okay with you, we're going to take 3 questions so that you can...
Professor, it was a pleasure as always. Thank you very much for the presentation. Manuel Cabogueira, I'm from Portugal. We met some years ago at Penn University, actually. And my question is actually related to the university itself, because some years ago I was discussing cost-benefit analysis here in the States. And a teacher from Stanford at some point said, well, maybe our advantage is because we have been teaching that in our courses for a long time. And you in Europe are using the technique without teaching it, without creating the capacity. And my question is, yes, we have to put people in the center. Yes, we have to convince and use the tools intelligently. How can we prepare for that? Should we transform the legal courses? Should we create capacity building in the universities? Because within this room, it is easy to gain momentum. But outside of the room, how should we do, and what should we do at the university level, at, I don't know, at any other level, to actually create capacity to regulate using these tools?
Thank you. We'll take in the back, please. Yes.
Thanks so much. My name is David Leslie. I'm professor at Queen Mary University of London and director of ethics and responsible innovation research at the Alan Turing Institute. I guess I have a question about whether or not this criteria about AI performing better is an oversimplification itself. So in one sense, right, I think we can think of it in 2 ways. First, in one sense, if we start to think about Goodhart's law, right, which states that when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. And we know from the way that AI has been sold that oftentimes the performance metrics themselves have been gamed. So for instance, you use the example of the large language model performance on the standardized tests. Many studies have shown that there's elements of data memorization and elements of these systems being sort of trained for the tests that is more reflected, right, in performance than the actual performance of a human judging with common sense and practical knowledge in real concrete contexts. Another example of the performance or measurement bias would be aggregate measurements of performance that cover over differential performance on demographic subgroups, which is especially, I think, a sensitive issue, right, in the Latin American, Caribbean context. So I think there's that one side of it that I think is oversimplified. Second is that in one sense, we would think there has to be more criteria than performance to judge whether or not AI should be used in government. In fact, the rise of fundamental rights impact assessment, human rights, democracy, and rule of law impact assessment, they called us to more holistically look at criteria such as, for instance, will the lack of transparency in a system, lack of explainability in the system, infringe on due process rights, et cetera? Or will this particular system in a high impact use case hold a high risk of infringing upon a particular fundamental right or freedom? That criteria has to be essential, especially with the public duty of care. So I just want to sort of complicate the story a little bit asking for some nuance.
Thank you. Can we get one more? Yes, the lady in the back, and then we'll get another round. Yes. Can you speak louder? We cannot hear you very well.
Okay, can you hear me? Oh, thank you. So thank you, Professor. This is really fascinating. I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about how the United States regulates the procurement process for IA itself. I understand that there's only a few companies in the world that have developed mature technology to be used in regulation. So what rules are in place to address potential biases or conflict of interest that may come from the choice of the IA platform that would be used for regulation? So thank you.
Okay, so great questions. The three different kinds of questions. I'll take them in order and briefly. I guess there's some other questions. So at the university level, what to do? I think this is something that we're having a great deal of conversations about everywhere today. Certainly, as you could see, if a large language model can pass a bar exam, you know, at the 90th percentile level after 6 months of tweaking and additional training, that raises some questions about what we're doing by way of examination and training of people to be lawyers. But I guess, and we, in fact, at this very moment, I think, or maybe in an hour or two at our university, we're having a faculty gathering about how AI affects, should affect how we evaluate student work. So these conversations are happening a lot. I think there's no clear yet answer to your question. Like with a lot of things in regulation, no easy answers. But I think the pathway is, like with a lot of regulation, to experiment, assess, and see what's working. And it may be that traditional forms of university level education are still very important for training humans, the way that humans are designed to operate. But there may be also new forms, and we're seeing it with online courses and certificate programs and the like that are not necessarily always university-based that are important as well. I do think that we should recognize that in a world in which we're following what I'm suggesting and implementing AI when it performs better, and I'll get to that question next. It will perform better at some tasks that can be that can overcome human limitations when it comes to routine task processing speed for lots of things that are repetitious. That is going to free up in government agencies and in society overall spheres of opportunity for human work. And so university training in humanities and thinking about what it really means to be a human, what's distinctive about humans that I think will continue to be really important. And that, I guess, bleeds over into the second question about what does it mean to perform better. And I really appreciate that question a lot because, yes, there is a tremendous amount of nuance. And that's one of the reasons why I think it's important not to be too quick to over-rely and get overconfident about what any particular tool might do. For many, many years, those of you who've been working in the regulatory space know that regulators have been advised to pursue performance-based regulation. This is well before AI came into the picture. The idea being that if regulators can set rules that are based upon a performance metric, that's a better way of regulating, because that allows then the regulated entities to go ahead and achieve that objective that's stated in the regulation in whatever manner is more effective, cost-effective, efficient, that they can find. And I've written a whole paper. I'm probably one of the relatively few, if maybe the only academic writing about regulation that's really questioned the almost universal acceptance of performance-based regulation as superior. Not that I think it couldn't be used in some instances, but it's precisely for the kinds of concerns, nuances that you've been talking about, that you can have a teaching to the test effect, where, for example, the Volkswagen company technically complied with diesel engine emissions regulations because it performed well on the testing devices, but then the computers were programmed later to optimize for another purpose and create more air pollution. The whole VW diesel engine scandal is an example of the limitations of performance-based regulation. And in the context of AI, the performance targets do have to take a lot into account. That's why I think the planning is got to be much more rigorous when you're dealing with issues that are higher stakes, where people's lives are really being affected or their rights are being directly affected. You also need to have ongoing vigilance. You can't assume that you get it right the first time, and or that how it will be deployed in practice or as new data are integrated into it will perform the same way. So ongoing vigilance is really important, and keeping in mind all of those criticisms and concerns that human rights activists and others are saying about transparency and due process. Those are all real, and they will make AI tools perform better, but in a much more robust and meaningful way. With respect to the last question on procurement, I guess I have a little less direct ability to answer the question of why some companies are getting the benefits of some procurement contracts today, not others. But I will say that the procurement process for AI is, I think, not a standard one. And I have written that what government agencies need to do is use that procurement, those negotiations over government procurement of AI services, to make sure that the terms of those contracts incorporate concerns about transparency, about public participation, about adequate testing and validation. That you build in and use procurement contracts as a governance tool. And I think that's what's really important to keep in mind. Whether we're doing that adequately today in the US or not, I guess I would probably say my hunch would be that we're not doing it always adequately. We could always be doing better. And that's one of the reasons why I'm flagging that as such an important area for consideration going forward.
Perfect. We have time for a couple of more questions. Go ahead. One question, I've been told. And then one online. Yes.
Thank you, Carrie, for a wonderful presentation. My name is Seung-Han Hong. I'm a fellow at KIPA, Korea Institute of Public Administration. And I read one of your articles a couple of months ago on digital regulators. And one of your arguments was that the regulators should have in-house technical capacity equivalent to the entities they are regulating. And I can't agree more with you in that. And then today you talked about the procurement and also the in-house capacity in developing AI solutions in the public sector. But what I think is that the traditionally, the way that the government introduced information system was that the government expressed the demands and they outsource, right, the public sector, the private sector to develop such information system. And I don't think that is sustainable in the era of AI, because regulators know regulations, but technical firms, they don't know about regulations. So there should be some sort of public-private partnership, but what sort of public-private partnership do you think it is necessary?
Thank you. And I'm going to read one question that has been posted online. And this comes from Marcelo Sanchez. And he's asking, can the implementation of artificial intelligence systems in Latin America public administration, in context of marked by weak rule of law, systemic corruption, and transparency deficits, strengthen bureaucratic rationality and accountability, or does it rather tend to obscure state decisions through a technocracy algorithm that evades political and judicial responsibility?
Okay, I'll take those two questions, and there, I guess, I would say in terms of the call for digital regulators, first of all, which I think is important to just keep in mind here, that as much as the private sector is starting to use AI, and whole segments of the economy are being driven by AI, and AI is itself part of the economy, that just, I think, emphasizes all the more reason why regulators themselves have to start using these tools to just be able to keep up. Now, they can't compete on the same salaries that are in the private sector for people, but they can compete, I think, on mission. And I think that's the thing to keep in mind. What is the purpose of your regulatory agency? In other fora, I talk a lot about achieving and seeking regulatory excellence and building up the capacity in your agencies around a common mission, and is going to be important for bringing in good talent and keeping them there. But yes, you're going to have to rely probably on private sector actors too, and public-private partnerships will need to be structured through often that procurement document, a negotiated document that can incorporate a little constitution, if you will, for your use of AI. I would say the other thing to keep in mind here with public-private partnerships, and it's worth noting, and I think your comment really drives this home, is there's different kinds of knowledge that is so important in using AI tools wisely in the regulatory context. There's not only the knowledge about AI, but also the knowledge about regulation, about public and administrative law. And so what's really important is not just the public-private partnerships, but also interdisciplinary teams of public-private people from different disciplines who can talk to one another. That's ironically what we did 20 years ago at the beginning of my slides when I quoted from our report on e-rulemaking. We brought together lawyers, we brought together computer scientists, we brought together political scientists, ethicists, and one of the things that project informed here in the US was the development of regulations.gov, a first-generation digital way of thinking about improving the regulatory process through making materials available online. And it's quite remarkable, really, when I think about my own career. I can now, on my phone, access information that an agency was relying upon in developing a regulation by going to regulations.gov. Whereas before I would have to actually travel to a physical room and maybe ask somebody to pull something out of a file cabinet. So it's, if we think about what we've achieved so far through interdisciplinary teams, we can improve even more. And I guess that leads to the last question about what about corruption? Can we get more accountable, more fair government through AI, or are we just going to get more obscure authoritarianism? Well, I think that any tool can be abused, and AI tools can be abused just like anything else. But there's a possibility, and I guess I'm more on the glass half full side of things here. There's a real possibility with AI of improving on our human systems. And this is another thing to just keep in mind when we yes, we can talk about all the nuances in performing better, but let's also reflect that back on our human systems. If we're concerned about transparency and obscurity, well, how transparent right now is our human-based governing systems in a lot of places? And probably not doing all that well. The humans can maybe even sometimes create rationalizations and tell the public why they're doing one thing, but is it the real reason? And we have bias and corruption and authoritarian decision making, all being made by humans. So humans are not always really necessarily the gold standard. If we can do better than that, we should. And there is the possibility with AI that we can. And one of the reasons why I guess I'm a more glass half full person on this is that with AI, the only way it's going to work is if we collect data, and if we evaluate, and if we validate, doing things that often we have not done enough of. If you look at the OECD's recommendations on regulatory reform, governments around the world have put in place some of their recommendations, maybe sometimes in a pro forma fashion. But one of the recommendations that the OECD continues to say there's the least amount of attention to around the world is evaluation ex post of regulations. And one of the limitations and challenges of that, of course, is that it's sometimes hard to get the data. Well, if we are moving to a digitized world where we have to, if we're going to be using AI, then there's the possibility, and a promise, not saying it will always be fully realized, but the possibility and promise that we will know better where the problems are and we can fix them. It's a lot easier, in principle at least, to adjust the mathematical properties of an algorithm, the digital mathematical algorithm, than it is to reprogram the intrinsic biases that are in the human mind. So it is a question of algorithm versus algorithm, and if we approach AI in the spirit of trying to improve and to know when we're doing better, then I think we have a possibility, a promise of a better tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. I think it has been a fascinating keynote presentation and dialogue. So thank you very much. I think all of us have learned a lot, and also we get a sense of optimism of looking at this issue a little bit half full, not half empty. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Emilio and Professor Coglianesi, for that great keynote speech. We will now begin our first panel of the day, AI for Better Regulation, Challenges and IDB Support to Governments. We will explore how artificial intelligence is transforming regulatory processes and strengthening state capacity to improve regulatory quality in the region. For this, I welcome to the stage Sebastián López Azumendi, Lead Public Sector Specialist at the IDB's Institutional Capacity of the State Division, Eduardo Levi Yeyati, Consultant at the IDB's Productivity, Trade and Innovation Department, and our panel's moderator, Paula Acosta Marquez, Division Chief of the Institutional Capacity of the State Division at the IDB. While they settle on stage, as before, we will have a Q&A session following the panel so you can prepare your questions. The floor is yours, Paula.
Muchas gracias, Kiki. Para mantenerlo variado, vamos a hacer este panel en español. Una bienvenida muy especial a los panelistas, a Sebastián, a Eduardo. Un saludo también muy especial a las cerca de 150 personas que están en este momento conectadas y siguiendo este evento. Yo quisiera continuar con el tono positivo que nos dejó el profesor colianense de cómo puede realmente la inteligencia artificial aportar al desarrollo, a un mejor uso, a la supervisión de la regulación dentro de la región. Desde la División de Capacidad Institucional del Estado tenemos una tarea fantástica que es apoyar a los gobiernos de la región a mejorar las capacidades institucionales. Y la inteligencia artificial es una más de esas herramientas dentro de un proceso que lleva décadas, como lo mencionaba también el profesor colianese, de transformación digital. Hay etapas dentro de ese proceso de transformación digital en donde tener, por ejemplo, los textos, los documentos, la regulación de forma digital, de tal forma que se pueda consultar para los propósitos regulatorios, es un avance muy importante y muy significativo. Pero también tenemos retos grandes en la región. El profesor nos hablaba de más de 3.000 casos de uso en regulación en Estados Unidos, y parte de la investigación que hemos hecho dentro de la división muestra que casi en todos los países de la región hay casos de uso asociados a los temas de regulación. Para simplificación, que los vamos a conversar en algunos de los paneles durante el día, en supervisión, que también están acá representados, y también en la administración misma de la regulación. Pero también hay unos retos particulares a la región, en donde varias de las cosas que se dan sentadas en un gobierno como el de Estados Unidos, en donde hay un volumen muy grande de datos, en donde hay una gobernanza de datos, en donde hay entidades dedicadas a gobernanza de datos, pues están y funcionan como el marco más amplio, el contexto más amplio para que esto se dé. Yo voy a leerles dos datos. Regálenme un segundo. $26% de los países tienen una estrategia comprensiva nacional de datos. Esos son los datos para América Latina y el Caribe. 70% no tiene una entidad responsable de la gobernanza de los datos. 83% no tiene repositorios o inventarios oficiales de datos, y 40% tiene autoridad para protección de datos personales. Creo que eso es un poco un contexto diferente a lo que veníamos viendo en Estados Unidos. Pero para conversar sobre el rol de la IA en la gestión regulatoria y sobre la oferta que desde el BID contamos con la presencia de Sebastián y de Eduardo, a quienes quiero presentar. Sebastián es especialista líder del sector público de la División de Capacidad Institucional del Estado acá en el BID, desde donde lidera la agenda de calidad regulatoria y desburocratización del Estado. Desde esta posición coordina la agenda regional en regulación basada en evidencia, reducción de cargas regulatorias, gobernanza de datos normativos y desarrollo de herramientas de inteligencia artificial para mejorar los procesos regulatorios, trabajando estrechamente con los gobiernos nacionales y subnacionales. Con más de 20 años de experiencia en políticas públicas, Sebastián ha dirigido proyectos en áreas como simplificación administrativa, análisis de impacto regulatorio, interoperabilidad y transformación digital de Estado. Ha acompañado reformas en un número muy importante de países de la región. Él tiene un máster en políticas públicas de la Universidad de Duke y es licenciado en Derecho de la Universidad de La Plata. Eduardo Levy es economista y referente internacional en desarrollo productivo, mercados laborales y políticas públicas en América Latina. Es profesor plenario de la Escuela de Gobierno de la Universidad Torcuato Di Tella en Buenos Aires, donde también dirige el Centro de Políticas Basadas en Evidencia. Es además Non-Resident Senior Fellow del Brookings Institute. Eduardo ha ocupado posiciones de alto nivel en organismos internacionales y en el sector público. Fue economista jefe del Banco Central de la República de Argentina, asesor del Banco Mundial, jefe de investigación para América Latina y estrategia de mercados emergentes en Berkeley Capital y director de Argentina 2030, la agencia de pensamiento estratégico de la presidencia de Argentina. Es autor de numerosos libros y cada vez Eduardo tiene más publicaciones sobre los temas de inteligencia artificial. Acá tengo tal vez los últimos dos, Eduardo, tú me corregirás. Automatizados y inteligencia artificial, incluyendo, y después del trabajo, perdón. En este momento contamos con la suerte de tener a Eduardo como un asesor regional en el BID en estos temas de inteligencia artificial. Y voy a hacer un poco una introducción y vamos a ir a las preguntas, que es a lo que vinimos, y vamos a tener también un espacio para preguntas tanto acá en vivo como quienes están conectados. En el contexto de América Latina y el Caribe, los problemas regulatorios están más asociados al exceso y no a la falta de normas, sumado a la fragmentación y baja capacidad para gestionarlos. Algunos hablan del laberinto regulatorio, conformado por duplicidades, contradicciones, normas obsoletas, procesos lentos y manuales, en donde todos nos perdemos, tanto las empresas como los ciudadanos. Los mecanismos tradicionales de revisión manual, análisis de impacto regulatorio, consultas públicas, no necesariamente escalan al volumen o la velocidad que se necesita. Los mecanismos tradicionales presentan desafíos de diseño institucional en términos de los incentivos del sector público para adoptar herramientas costosas, que son intensivas en el uso de datos y que en algunos casos se han convertido en obstáculos burocráticos. Para arrancar esta conversación y nuevamente buscando mantener este ambiente positivo de nuestra presentación anterior, quisiera preguntarles en dónde ven ustedes que están las más grandes oportunidades para la región, para aprovechar las herramientas y las posibilidades que nos da la inteligencia artificial en temas regulatorios. Eduardo, te doy la bienvenida y te doy la palabra.
Bueno, buenos días a todos. Primero un disclaimer. Gracias por la introducción. Yo no soy un experto en regulación, así que muchos de ustedes deben saber más de regulación que yo. Fue súper interesante la presentación del profesor recién porque sentó las bases de un parámetro que ahora hay que bajar a la tierra en la realidad de nuestros países. Entonces, vale la pena empezar haciendo algunas aclaraciones. La primera es que, como bien decía Paula, tenemos mucha estrategia, pocos datos. O sea, todos los países están armando estrategias, lo cual los posiciona mejor en los índices de AI Readiness and Preparedness, y visibilidad internacional. Pero luego cuando uno baja a la tierra, lo primero que encuentra es una asignatura pendiente mucho más antigua. Y la presentación estuvo muy clara en distinguir tres conceptos, yo le agregaría un cuarto. Una cosa es la digitalización, otra cosa es la automatización. Luego tenemos la inteligencia artificial y luego la inteligencia artificial generativa. La última es la del GPT de hace 3 años. La inteligencia artificial existe hace mucho. Automatización puede o no ser inteligencia artificial. Nosotros nos debemos en muchos casos la digitalización. Entonces ponemos un caso, por ejemplo, que a mí siempre me obsesiona, el caso de digitalización en la educación. Hay países, recuerdo Dominicana, por ejemplo, que hace décadas que ha digitalizado sus escuelas. Hay muchas economías en Latinoamérica que no tienen digitalizadas sus escuelas. Con la digitalización yo puedo tener sistemas expertos, que no son inteligencia artificial, que me dicen, por ejemplo, me anticipan el abandono, me identifican rezagos. Con la inteligencia artificial puedo hacer algo sobre eso. Con la inteligencia artificial generativa puedo generar programas para tutorear a esa gente y traerla y tener especialización en la manera en que yo estoy abordando diferentes chicos, sobre todo en lugares donde la heterogeneidad de los alumnos es muy alta. Nosotros todavía no hemos digitalizado, entonces tenemos que tener la modestia de empezar donde tenemos que empezar, que es a juntar la información, porque mucho de lo que nosotros podemos hacer con la inteligencia artificial, que es muchísimo, todo lo que podemos hacerlo, para eso primero necesitamos datos. Buenos datos, datos cuidados, datos curados. ¿Sí? Entonces, lo primero es ser conscientes de esta si quiere, asignatura pendiente. Quizás la inteligencia artificial, como decía el profesor nos ayude a paliar eso, porque como es tal la promesa, nosotros ahora tenemos un incentivo más a buscar los datos, a digitalizar las escuelas, pero sobre todo nuestros estados. Nuestros estados son analógicos en la mayoría de los casos. Acá no voy a aclarar cada vez que hable que hay mucha heterogeneidad en la región, pero en la mayoría de los países los estados siguen siendo fuertemente analógicos. Entonces eso es lo primero que hay que destacar. Necesitamos datos. Lo segundo que hay que destacar es que para uno hacer uso de la inteligencia artificial, sobre todo en regulación, necesitamos capital humano especializado. Porque la regulación a través de la inteligencia artificial no terceriza la regulación. La inteligencia artificial, como se dijo en la presentación recién, cuanto más altos sean los stakes, el impacto, el riesgo, mayor es el nivel de transparencia, mayor es el nivel de supervisión, mayor es la participación del ser humano, el human in the loop de la regulación. Y en la mayoría de los casos, sobre todo en el Estado, que simplemente uno puede analizar los lineamientos regulatorios de Europa y se ve que el Estado es un lugar típicamente de alto riesgo porque hay datos muy sensibles, porque un error puede hacer mucho daño. Ahí se necesita mucha participación del funcionario, pero el funcionario tiene que estar capacitado. Porque cuando habla de regulación habla de explicabilidad, habla de revisión de códigos, habla de trazabilidad, todos temas muy técnicos que si uno piensa en el imaginario que tenemos todos nosotros de cuál es el funcionario promedio, hoy posiblemente ese funcionario no esté capacitado para llevar adelante todas esas tareas. Entonces poner en manos de esos funcionarios instrumentos de regulación, siendo que no pueden ser supervisados como deberían serlo, bueno, tiene un downside importante. Entonces, de vuelta, hay que capacitar. Si hay un lugar donde es necesario de manera urgente es un reskilling y un upskilling de la fuerza laboral, es en el sector público. Si no, es muy difícil, digamos así, no hay que entrar en esa fantasía de compramos en el enlatado y le decimos al programa, hazme esto y hazme aquello, y de pronto parece como arte de magia. Eso puede ser útil cuando uno escribe un reporte, definitivamente no es aconsejable cuando uno habla de regulación. Entonces, hay dos condiciones básicas por las cuales uno tiene que empezar. Ahora, con esto en mano, yo diría casi en todos los frentes del Estado, tenemos formas casi inmediatas de mejorar la gestión. Vos hablabas de... Ese es un test para ver qué tan concentrados estamos en lo que estamos diciendo. Voy a acercarme más porque si no, no se va a escuchar.
Cada 5 minutos va a sonar para que vayamos cambiando de tema.
Sí, es parte de la terapia, el entrenamiento que tenemos acá en el
Es un poco de terapia de shock nos están haciendo acá.
Tú mencionabas el laberinto regulatorio de permisos, restricciones, muchas de ellas cruzadas, duplicadas, algunas obsoletas. Eso es un lugar natural donde usar la inteligencia artificial para potenciar esa búsqueda, ¿sí? Yo creo que de hecho hoy si tuviéramos digitalizada esa información sería algo que podríamos ya, creo que hay algunos países que de hecho lo están haciendo, empezar a ordenar esa no sé cómo llamarlo, maleza regulatoria. Y eso sí es una medida de bajo riesgo, en el sentido que no implica sanciones, suspensiones, castigos. Entonces eso se puede hacer de manera rápida sin necesidad de tener tantas salvaguardas. Aquí tengo una lista, no quiero quedarme con nada afuera, pero por ejemplo, se mencionó recién el caso de Diela, ¿cómo se llamaba? La de Albania, la ministra de procurement de compras públicas. Claramente ahí no se puede prescindir de la supervisión humana, pero sí es cierto que el manejo de la información, el manejo más utilitarista, más libre de sesgos, más libre de corrupción y influencia de grupos de interés, es factible si usamos la inteligencia artificial. Eso es un lugar donde también se puede rápidamente, siempre con la participación humana, introducir inteligencia artificial y mejorar la gestión. Pero después hay un montón de otras tareas no administrativas. Por ejemplo, María mejoró el targeting de planes sociales, que típicamente se hace en base a criterios cualitativos para los cuales la inteligencia artificial puede operar de manera mucho más rigurosa y rápida y actualizada. Hay temas de fiscalización tributaria, por ejemplo, de supervisión financiera, en donde ahí ya con un riesgo mucho mayor, porque los datos son mucho más delicados, mucho más sensibles, pero también la inteligencia artificial puede ayudar a fiscalización. Temas de fiscalización, de hecho, se ha utilizado y se ha utilizado antes de la inteligencia artificial generativa y es aprobado que es muy eficiente. Inteligencia criminal, por ejemplo, se me ocurre que es un área en donde la inteligencia artificial puede mejorar muchísimo la gestión, complementando la gestión humana, porque no nos olvidemos que muchas veces el funcionario no es necesariamente el más capacitado. Nuestros estados muchas veces no pagan lo suficiente, no tienen los funcionarios técnicos más capacitados, tienen funcionarios que pueden gestionar, pero a veces la información que aporta la inteligencia artificial es complementaria a lo que aporta el funcionario. Entonces, una vez que nosotros tenemos los criterios, los datos y funcionarios que saben utilizar la inteligencia artificial, casi en cualquier lugar de la gestión pública uno puede potenciar, diría, exponencialmente la capacidad, la eficiencia, pero toda la capacidad de gestionar. No hablo de salud porque no soy un experto, pero en temas también de defensa, de patrullaje de costas, cualquiera de las funciones que se vienen a la cabeza, uno puede encontrar usos de la inteligencia artificial siempre que sean las condiciones que decíamos antes. Si querés después volvemos un poco, pero ahí uno tiene que tener la gobernanza de datos correcta, el capital humano correcto y eventualmente sí, en casos muy delicados, tener algunos testeos, algunos pilotos que nos aseguren que no vayamos a cometer un error que luego nos juegue en contra porque demore la implementación en otros sectores.
Muchas gracias, Eduardo. Nos hablas de un potencial muy grande de usos de la IA dentro del sector público. Sebastián, y quisiera preguntarte un poco por esos casos que ya hemos identificado en materia regulatoria dentro de la región. Nos cuentes un poco qué es lo que estás viendo y cómo es también una oportunidad para ampliar el impacto que se tiene desde la regulación.
Sí, a pesar de los desafíos, hay buenas noticias. Es un mensaje de optimismo. De hecho, los casos que voy a mencionar aquí, hay dos entidades de gobierno que están presentes y que están liderando esas reformas. Un caso es el caso de la Comisión Nacional de Productividad de Chile. Aquí nos acompaña Cristian Romero, que es el director de Legales, y en donde se está utilizando IA generativa, que es la IA que transforma contenido. Por ejemplo, cuando subimos algún post de LinkedIn o queremos escribir un email, es la IA que estamos utilizando, ¿no? Y ellos lo que hicieron fue mapear entre 2015 y 2024 1.336 autorizaciones ambientales en los sectores de energía y minería. Eso representa 62% de la inversión en Chile. Esto no es menor, ¿sí? Y eso implicó identificar 220.000 obligaciones fiscalizables, algo así como 126.927 páginas, que es, imagínense, un edificio de 4 pisos. Eso es la tarea. Si ven al ministro Stutzenegger, que él es un proxy que utiliza mucho, es la regulación que desreguló, que son 20 páginas, y la pila anterior, que son 8, 10, 20 resmas de papel, ¿no? Entonces, ¿qué encontraron? Que no habían habido grandes cambios legislativos, pero que encontraron que más 176% de carga regulatoria ambiental, ¿no? En energía, con un incremento de 246% más en minería. Entonces, ¿qué explica ese cambio? Si la ley no cambió, ¿no? Entonces, a partir del uso de IA, y esto es, por eso es IA as a tool, y es como una herramienta de mejorar el proceso decisorio, encontraron que los proyectos pequeños han recibido un aumento desproporcional de carga regulatoria, y también que el sistema dejaba espacios relevantes para la discrecionalidad administrativa, imponiendo requisitos que no necesariamente eran legales, ¿sí? Y eso no es menor porque eso permite atacar el problema, ¿no? Por ejemplo, de estas 220.000 obligaciones, el 63% tiene origen normativo explícito y el 37% restante son condiciones discrecionales. Ese trabajo que está publicado y que lo va a presentar Cristian es un avance significativo en la región, sobre todo para aquellas entidades que hacen el enforcement regulatorio respecto de cómo se puede identificar el problema, actuar en consecuencia. La segunda experiencia es de la Comisión Nacional Bancaria y de Valores de México, que está aquí presente y que le agradecemos también su presencia. La comisión creó a través de un prototipo una iniciativa de arquitectura de supervisión digital subtech en la implementación de las normas antilavado. Eso implicó interoperar en tiempo real entre el regulador, la comisión y el resto de las entidades, tanto bancarias como aquellas que cotizaban en el mercado de valores. Y eso produjo, ¿sí?, efectividad del enforcement y eficiencia en el reporte. Algunos datos. Por ejemplo, las transacciones en paraísos fiscales, que antes de la arquitectura de supervisión digital demandaban 1.5 semanas, hoy se hacen en un segundo, ¿no? Esto implica interoperar datos. No es que tampoco, como decía Kerry, ¿no? Aquí el dato es clave, y aquí es una frase que me gusta: la IA es tan buena como los datos que recibe, ¿sí? O sea, la IA si no tenemos datos no vamos a ningún lado. Por ejemplo, identificar transacciones de menores de edad, mayores de 80 años y empresas menores de 30 años de antigüedad. Antes de la arquitectura de supervisión digital basada en IA, se demoraban una semana. Después de la arquitectura de supervisión digital, 3 minutos. Demoras entre la detección y la alerta de operaciones ilegales. Antes 3 semanas, hoy 15 segundos. Y así hay muchas otras variables de impacto, lo cual habla del potencial que esto tiene tanto en la eficiencia como también mejorar los niveles de confianza entre el regulador y las empresas reguladas. En regulación, la asimetría de información es el principal desafío a resolver, ¿sí? Porque esto implica mayores costos para los usuarios. No sé si tengo tiempo de hablar de una tercera que es de San Francisco, ¿sí? Ok, entonces el Rec Lab de San Francisco creó, que es de la Universidad de Stanford, creó algo que se llama Esta, que es un Statutory Research Assistant. Lo que han creado un mecanismo basado en IA que recorre, en este caso, el San Francisco's Administrative Code, que es la ley de procedimientos administrativos, ¿no? Identificando a partir de análisis semántico cargas regulatorias, cargas de reporting, ¿no? Entonces, se identificaron 6.814 secciones del Código Americano conteniendo obligaciones de reporting, ¿no? Y eso, ¿en qué terminó eso? En la identificación de 500 obligaciones de reporting y en la eliminación y modificación del 36% de las obligaciones de reporting. O sea, como resultado de eso, hubo un recorte, una disminución del 36% de las cargas regulatorias de reporting. Todo esto se hace a partir de modelos de lenguaje amplio, ¿no?, que revisan todo el ordenamiento jurídico o un estatuto específico, y estas son soluciones concretas que están teniendo lugar en la región y que creo que ya están marcando el camino a seguir y que obviamente desde el BID podemos apoyar a ampliar. Gracias.
Gracias, Sebastián. Yo sé que Eduardo quería intervenir acá también.
No, solo quería enfatizar una línea, siguiendo un poco lo que dijo Sebastián. Cuando uno piensa en la regulación, lo primero que le viene a la cabeza es eliminar regulaciones. Pero así como la IA sobre todo la IA generativa, es un algoritmo más datos, y los datos son los que representan la calidad de la IA. En la regulación es la regulación per se, el enforcement, y yo creo que donde más valor agregado hay en términos de uso de IA es en facilitar el enforcement, porque la regulación es tan buena como su enforcement. Si no hay enforcement o si hay influencias, sesgos en la ejecución de la regulación no sirve para mucho. Entonces, si bien es fácil pensarlo como limpiando regulaciones, esa limpieza de regulaciones muchas veces no tiene tanto impacto en la productividad, mientras que el buen enforcement sin sesgos es fundamental para la gestión del Estado.
Mira, te adelantaste a la siguiente pregunta, que venía sobre el tema de supervisión. Pues, nuevamente, parte de las discusiones amplias que se han tenido en la región sobre el tema de regulaciones, tenemos un acervo regulatorio muy amplio, pero además también unas capacidades limitadas para supervisar esa regulación. Finalmente, la regulación, si no se supervisa y si no hay un control creíble, pues tiene un efecto muy limitado, ¿no? Yendo a ese tema que tú estás planteando de supervisión, quisiera preguntarte cuáles son esas condiciones que se deberían tener para hacer un uso apropiado, seguro. Acá vimos, pues la tecnología todavía es una tecnología en desarrollo que también presenta unos retos. ¿Cuáles deberían ser esas condiciones, Eduardo, para utilizar la IA en esa función de supervisión de la regulación que es tan importante?
Algunas ya las planteamos, las puedo plantear en más detalle, pero obviamente la capacidad del funcionario y la calidad de los dos es importante. Bueno, yo tengo anotados algunos principios que estaba justo buscando. La supervisión, cuando es simplemente reordenar datos y no tiene un efecto sobre derechos privados, en general el nivel de auditing, de transparencia, existe, pero es moderado, porque finalmente estamos hablando, no hay ningún perjudicado, ¿sí? Pero cuando empieza a haber algún perjudicado, cuando la situación deviene en una multa, en una sanción, una suspensión, eventualmente en un juicio, caemos en un concepto que los economistas, por lo menos en mi época, llamamos de verificabilidad. Nosotros tenemos que tener que el efecto de la supervisión, la acción del Estado tiene que ser transparente en muchos sentidos. Tiene que ser transparente, tiene que ser explicable, sobre todo si participó la IA, alguien tiene que decir por qué, cuál fue el proceso. Entonces, definitivamente no queremos un off-the-shelf, un enlatado, un black box, ¿sí? No podemos usar programas para supervisar regulaciones que no nos dejen explicar las razones, el recorrido por el cual nosotros hicimos una acción. Luego hay un tema que es fundamental, que tiene que ver con la soberanía informática o tecnológica. Soberanía, cuando hablamos de esto, no significa geopolítica, es básicamente el control que tiene el Estado de los modelos y de los datos. Por ejemplo, los modelos que se utilizan, el Estado no necesariamente los tiene que hacer in-house, pero los modelos que adquiere tienen que ser abiertos para el Estado, por ahí no abiertos para el público, pero abiertos para el Estado. Y tienen que estar alojados, se denomina model residency, en algún lugar a donde el Estado tenga acceso, no sea cosa que la empresa quiebre y resulte que perdemos los datos, o la empresa por algún motivo, en un conflicto, no nos deja acceder. Tiene que tener control y trazabilidad de los datos de cada una de las partes que se utilizan para la supervisión. Entonces, ese nivel de transparencia implica no solo tener datos, implica un nivel de cuidado, de curaduría y de preservación y de control en el proceso de los datos del cual estamos hoy muy lejos, ¿sí? Estamos hablando de supervisiones, de regulaciones que implican una multa, una suspensión, una acción contra un derecho privado. Y luego hay cuestiones que muy básicas de inscripción. Necesitamos tener inscripción de esos datos no solo in transit, sino cuando están en el lugar, en su sitio, at rest, como se dice, en el mismo servidor donde nosotros lo guardamos. Son por ahí cosas muy técnicas, pero que al final del día uno imagina que cuando uno hace una acción, esa acción es litigable y el Estado tiene que poder defender esa acción en la Corte. Entonces, todos estos detalles muy técnicos, muy precisos, sobre los cuales se puede ahondar mucho más, son fundamentales para que esa acción no se frene en un litigio y para que el Estado tenga legitimidad al actuar en base a esta supervisión.
Muchas gracias, Eduardo. Yo creo que hay un tema de qué significa ser transparente cuando estamos utilizando inteligencia artificial, que es una pregunta amplia. Ser transparente significa publicar los algoritmos, significa publicar las bases de datos. Este entrenamiento que hablamos, que es fundamental para los funcionarios públicos para que puedan usar de forma segura y adecuada la inteligencia artificial, ¿quién más debe tener este entrenamiento? ¿Los organismos de control de las funciones que está desarrollando el Estado, la sociedad civil para que pueda auditar realmente cómo funcionan estos organismos? Veo que
hay un punto que es fundamental. Cuando yo inicio una acción contra un privado, ese privado tiene que tener el derecho a la apelación. Entonces, esa decisión tiene que poder ser defendida. Tenemos que tener la suficiente transparencia como para ofrecer en la apelación los datos que están detrás de la decisión del sector público, ¿sí? Y ahí sí necesitamos un humano que pueda defender la decisión, porque si no estaríamos de alguna forma avasallando los derechos privados sin poder dar una explicación sobre las razones de la acción.
De acuerdo. Bueno, quiero, antes de que vuelva a sonar nuestro electroshock dentro de la sala, moverme a la siguiente pregunta. Y nuevamente, esta es para ti, Eduardo, y es una pregunta que está presente típicamente en estas discusiones de IA, y es ¿cómo crees que debería regularse el uso de IA en el Estado sin frenar esa innovación? Porque parte de lo que vemos acá es modelos innovadores, lo decía el embajador de Portugal en sus palabras al inicio, y es, acá hay una posibilidad de repensar muchas veces el Estado. Creo que Ese repensar viene desde los procesos de transformación digital, en donde parte, digamos, de la promesa de valor no era volver todo digital, digitalizar el proceso tal cual estaba, sino repensar.
Todos los países tienen buscadores normativos, ¿no? La idea es que eventualmente podamos avanzar hacia buscadores inteligentes, que es algo que nosotros del BID vamos a estar apoyándolos probablemente en esta área, ¿no? Nosotros, por ejemplo, inclusive desde el equipo de reforma regulatoria, ya estamos creando bases de datos usando IA, usando todos los buscadores normativos de cada uno de los países que componen el BID, ¿no? Entonces, y nos damos cuenta que es algo muy relevante porque podemos mapear regulaciones por cada uno de los sectores, podemos definir en qué aspectos del sector de la regulación salud hay mayores, donde se concentra la mayor cantidad de regulaciones, que es en autorizaciones y permisos, por ejemplo, y ahora estamos entrenando un modelo de IA para hacer un poco lo que hizo San Francisco, es decir, empezar a cuantificar los requisitos de las regulaciones para entender, tener una idea de costo. Si a eso luego le sumamos, como lo va a hablar Alemania, una base de datos de costos de compliance regulatorio, bueno, el ejercicio es completo y así podemos ir avanzando a, por ejemplo, análisis de costo-beneficios ex ante con mucha exactitud, con mucha rigurosidad, ¿no? También eso nos permite avanzar en el análisis automático de redundancias y conflictos normativos. Otra cosa que estamos haciendo aquí en el BID es hacer web scraping de precios que existen en distintas bases de APIs de grandes supermercados y compararlos entre países y ver si esas distorsiones de precios pueden estar vinculadas con distorsiones regulatorias, controlando por tarifas, ¿no? Digamos que eso que excluye el tema tarifario, ¿no? Estos buscadores también, crear buscadores normativos muy enfocados, por ejemplo, a el sector pymes. Es algo que en el Reino Unido ya se está desarrollando y eso permitiría que una empresa pyme pueda hacer una búsqueda muy específica, muy enfocada en sus necesidades. La sistematización de procesos de cientos y miles de comentarios a consultas públicas es otra aplicación que no es compleja de hacer y ya se está haciendo en varios países, lo está haciendo el Reino Unido con el UK AI Incubator y es código abierto y podemos también hablar con ellos para llevarlo a otros países. Y así y sucesivamente. Una vez que los datos son buenos y entrenamos el IA y creamos un diccionario jurídico de términos, porque eso también es muy relevante para que el IA pueda hacer equivalencias entre distintos tipos de decretos, ya luego ya el trabajo se convierte, diría, es divertido encontrar los findings, ¿no? Pero el trabajo de depuración es bien complejo. Voy a complementar esa pregunta con la oferta de valor y aquí, gracias.
Si quieres, esta es un poco como la pregunta de cierre para después dar espacio a tener preguntas del equipo. Si quieres, Sebastián, nos estabas mencionando algunos ejemplos de oferta de valor del BID. Si quieres complementar lo que tenemos en términos de oferta de valor. Y después le quisiera dar la palabra a Eduardo. Después te doy la palabra, Eduardo.
Teníamos one slide que queríamos compartir. Ok, voy a parar porque no logro ver muy bien. Entonces, este es, sí, está bien. Entonces, esto es solamente un slide. Son los tres grandes ejes de la propuesta de valor de ICS, de la División de Capacidad Institucional del Estado que lidera Paula respecto de lo que cómo vamos a apoyar a los gobiernos. Entonces, vamos a estar enfocándonos en tres grandes segmentos. Simplificación, desregulación, producción normativa, es la elaboración de regulaciones, todos los controles de calidad ex ante, y por último la supervisión y la fiscalización. Aquí el alcance, bueno, acá hay varios expertos, entienden qué significa cada uno. Los desafíos, por ejemplo, en la primera año, ¿qué vemos? Que países como Colombia demoraron, o naturalmente demoraron, y fue un proceso exitoso, 2 años en lograr la depuración de miles de decretos que terminaron en decretos únicos sectoriales. Lo mismo el gobierno de Argentina, el ministro Schwarzenegger, a pesar de que asumió su gestión en 2024, es un trabajo que le demoró años, año y medio, procesar miles de leyes y legislación. Eso es algo que con el uso de IA se podría abreviar significativamente esos tiempos, reducir el margen de error y ampliar también el scope de resultados. Por ejemplo, en producción normativa, ¿no? Hoy gran parte de la región está avanzando en los análisis de costo-beneficio antes de regular, que son herramientas que las promovemos, que las apoyamos, alineadas a los lineamientos de OECD, pero vemos que en algunos casos son herramientas muy costosas y que empiezan a generar ciertas reacciones negativas en cuanto a la burocratización del proceso de calidad regulatoria, y es algo que no es deseable, ¿sí? Entonces, aquí también estamos pensando en que algunas herramientas, por ejemplo, basadas en IA, que permitan, antes de regular, encontrar potenciales duplicidades normativas, antes de regular, facilitaría muchísimo la implementación, reduciría también la judicialización de muchas decisiones, permitiría la coordinación entre el sector público y también, y de hecho vamos a ver el caso de Fore Legal de Brasil, el último día, que es una empresa de GovTech, podríamos inclusive avanzar en la creación de un índice de litigiosidad, sistematizando todas las decisiones finales de los Supremos Tribunales Federales de la región, de modo que si yo voy a regular salud, pueda determinar que hay X cantidad de decisiones judiciales que han regulado esto y que, por lo tanto, voy a tener que tener, cuando diseño el decreto, mucho en cuenta, porque si no, esto va a ser rebatido en la justicia. Entonces, este tipo de controles ex ante se pueden hacer a partir de IA. Por último, en materia de supervisión y fiscalización, donde creo que hay mayores avances en la región, aquí creo que, por ejemplo, el caso de México es altamente trasladable a los reguladores económicos de los sectores de utilities, transporte, agua, energía. Hay un caso del regulador Arcesp de Brasil que regula todos los sectores utilities de São Paulo, inclusive la empresa Sabesp, que es la mayor empresa de agua, una de las mayores empresas de agua del mundo, y ahí la interoperabilidad de datos entre el regulador y la empresa, que es algo que está ocurriendo, facilitaría muchísimo el enforcement y también ayudaría a crear confianza entre las empresas que prestan servicios y el regulador. Entonces, in a nutshell, esta es la propuesta de valor. Pronto va a salir un blog, pronto van a salir otros documentos, pero esto es lo que probablemente en los próximos años vamos a estar trabajando y apoyando a los gobiernos en estos 3 segmentos. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, Sebastián. Quiero dar la palabra a Eduardo para poco unas reflexiones más generales sobre el valor y la visión desde el grupo BID que se está construyendo en esta agenda. Nosotros estamos concentrados en la parte del sector público, pero esto tiene un componente también muy fuerte del sector privado. Adelante, Eduardo, y después tenemos ya varias preguntas. Le damos paso a las preguntas.
Bueno, voy a ser muy breve. El bancos, en una agenda tan en movimiento, tan en estado de flujo, la idea del banco es ayudar a los países como facilitador y como promotor de las condiciones habilitantes, como se llaman acá, de las condiciones necesarias. O sea, si yo quiero bajar a la tierra una regulación, tengo que tener quien la ejecute y tengo que tener los datos. Entonces, en la medida en que podamos, el banco va a promover la gestión de datos, la gobernanza, la formación de los funcionarios. De hecho, el enfoque más general que estamos promoviendo ahora es tratar de elaborar, a pedido de los países, un scorecard en donde identificamos las brechas para la transición hacia la IA. Brechas, hay muchas palabras que tienen significados solapados. Readiness, preparedness, disposición, preparación. Al final estamos hablando de capital humano, de capacidad institucional, de infraestructura digital, de acceso, de cosas básicas sin las cuales la transición va a ser un poco, va a ser interrumpido, va a ser desigual o incluso puede generar distorsiones e inequidades. Entonces, en base a ese approach, la idea del banco es identificar cuáles son las brechas y luego ofrecer ayuda tanto en formación, en infraestructura, en inversión, en capacidad estatal, de manera de, obviamente a pedido de los países, de manera de ayudar a achicar esas brechas y facilitar la transición. Acá hay una cosa que quiero destacar y con esto termino. Nosotros todavía no hemos visto nada de la inteligencia artificial generativa. No ha sido adoptada, pensamos que la estamos adoptando. Nosotros acabamos de hacer, con patrocinio del BID, una encuesta de adopción en Argentina y Uruguay. descubrimos, en los que nosotros intuíamos. Todo el mundo la usa como editor, como Google. No hay todavía una penetración, de la misma forma que no hubo penetración de los impactos de la corriente alterna hasta que 20 años después apareció el Fordismo. Entonces, todavía no hemos visto nada, no hemos visto la sustitución laboral, no hemos visto el impacto en la productividad, no hemos visto algo que si no nos preparamos vamos a ver en otros países. O sea, vamos a ver más productividad en otros países, vamos a ver el impacto en el empleo negativo en el nuestro. Entonces, este es el momento de transitar, es el momento de prepararnos. Y el enfoque del BID es básicamente identificar dónde estamos más débiles y ayudar a los países a prepararse.
Muchas gracias, Eduardo, y aprovecho para hacer otra cuña. En enero, el banco, con esta visión que tú estás describiendo, lanzó un marco para el trabajo interno del banco. Yo creo que nuevamente, está completamente alineado, creo que vale la pena difundirlo mucho más, porque creo que están las pistas de cómo seguir avanzando en esta tarea que tiene muchos frentes y en los cuales tenemos que avanzar muy de la mano. Sector privado, sector público, están en sala y nos van a acompañar hoy y mañana 4 emprendimientos que están trabajando justamente en la región en los temas de regulación e inteligencia artificial. Los invito a que conversemos y nos acompaña también el BID Lab, que permite hacer ese alcance de innovación con el sector privado y el sector público. Y abro el micrófono para preguntas. Fabricio, adelante. Si quieren, recogemos.
Muy buenos días para todos y básicamente, y muy bueno el panel, las discusiones. Básicamente una observación. Creo que el BID puso un acento en este tema correcto en ese documento elaborado con Miguel y con Fernando Vargas en 3 variables en esto: data, capacitación, recurso humano e instituciones. Pero yo hago un llamado un poco a back to the basics también cuando discutimos estas cosas y sobre todo cuando nos escuchan en la región. Nosotros que viajamos por la región estamos en contacto con los emprendedores, con las empresas, con la gente, con la sociedad civil. Tenemos que tener en cuenta que el 30% de la población no tiene acceso a Internet en América Latina, ¿no? 30%. No tiene acceso a Internet. Entonces, cuando hablamos de inteligencia artificial y todas estas cosas, tenemos que tener en cuenta que hay mucha gente que está fuera del sistema. Eso por un lado. Por otro, en los exámenes de PISA, 26% de los estudiantes de América Latina y el Caribe tienen niveles básicos de lectura y aprendizaje. 26%. O sea que estamos lidiando con una región de gente desconectada y de gente con muchas necesidades básicas, basics. Hablando de las variables que pone correctamente, creo, el BID, nuevamente, data, conectividad, capacitación, gente e instituciones, que obviamente es el ámbito natural de Paula y su equipo, donde también sabemos que hay una erosión de las instituciones, una erosión democrática, de basics, de la separación de poderes, de la sociedad civil, de la libertad de prensa, de la libertad de asociación, de la libertad de expresión. Entonces, creo que tenemos que tener en cuenta que esa es América Latina y el Caribe, ¿no? Y en ese ámbito nosotros tenemos que proponer y propulsar e incentivar la adopción de la innovación y de la inteligencia artificial, sin olvidar que hay unos basics que tenemos que trabajar en paralelo para no sonar desconectados. Y lo hacemos y es importante. Nosotros en el área de productividad, de innovación, de comercio exterior, por ejemplo, hemos sido los pioneros en las ventanillas únicas de comercio exterior de América Latina. Las creamos nosotros hace 20 años. En ese proceso simplificamos los trámites de comercio exterior, que eran demasiado engorrosos, demasiado lentos, redundantes, ¿no? Lo típico de reglas inflexibles de aplicación flexibles, en vez de reglas flexibles de aplicación inflexible, que es un mejor camino. Entonces, es un llamado simplemente a eso, y creo que esa reflexión la tenemos que hacer junto con el sector privado en la región, de la mano del sector privado, porque hablando de inteligencia artificial, la verdad que va demasiado rápido, el mercado va demasiado rápido, el Estado va demasiado lento y creo que es importante ese diálogo con el sector privado. De hecho, también paso una cuña, hemos creado en el America's Business Dialogue, hemos creado un grupo de trabajo en el cual estamos obviamente colaborando con ICS y el BidInvest y BidLab, etcétera, con OpenAI, Meta, Google, Microsoft, Mercado Libre, Globant, y las empresas que realmente están a la vanguardia en esto y están inventando la inteligencia artificial de lo que se viene. Entonces, creo que ese diálogo humilde y abierto con el sector privado va a ser fundamental en lo que hagamos.
Gracias, Fabricio. Les voy a pedir que vayamos a la pregunta para poder retomarlas y darle espacio a los panelistas.
Es más un complemento. Como he dicho, soy portugués, pero voy a intentar hablar en castellano para que se continúe. Pero portuñol, ¿por qué no? Solamente para decir una cosa, porque se ha hablado muchísimo de datos. Para venir a la tierra, a la implementación, tenemos que pensar que en este caso datos son muy más importantes de lo que parece, lo que puede parecer, porque se ha dicho 1, 2, 3, 4 veces que la inteligencia artificial es tan buena cuanto los datos que recibe. Pero en este caso, la verdad es que si no hay datos que nos pueden relacionar con nuestra realidad, el modelo no es válido. El problema es que cuando se habla de equidad de acceso a la inteligencia artificial, no es solamente la equidad de acceso a la infraestructura, es la equidad de acceso al modelo que es entrenado con nuestros datos. Por eso el caso de Portugal, de Amalia, es tan importante, porque estamos entrenando un modelo con los datos portugueses. Esto solamente para decir que la verdad es que tenemos que tener datos que puedan entrenar la máquina. Hay una máquina original que es creada, bien, pero después, como un chico pequeño, tiene que ser entrenada. Y lo tenemos que hacer con nuestros datos, con los datos de la región, con los datos de nuestra realidad, para que las propuestas que nos traiga sean adecuadas a nuestra realidad. Porque si no, estamos haciendo cuestiones al modelo, la respuesta es una respuesta que es buena para Norteamérica o Canadá o Inglaterra o algo así. Solamente para decir que lo caso de los datos es particularmente importante en nuestra realidad.
Una última aquí atrás.
Sí.
Acá.
Si quieren, vamos directo a la pregunta.
Sí, tiene que ver un poco también en el mismo sentido sobre las estrategias del levantamiento de datos. Quiero poner solamente el caso de Chile y en particular del tema que yo me ha tocado ver en Magallanes, por ejemplo, donde hay una fuerte presión para levantar proyectos de hidrógeno verde, donde hay un potencial energético enorme. Hay, por ejemplo, una comuna que tiene el tamaño del Líbano, digamos, no sé, perdón, de Palestina, de países. San Gregorio se llama, donde hay 200 habitantes y hay 2 proyectos que suman alrededor de 36.000 millones en inversión. Y hay 0 planificación territorial. Si bien hay una robustez institucional en Chile en términos de permisos y también hay una institucionalidad fuerte para normar territorios, no existe el tiempo, o sea, no hay tiempo para lograr un marco donde se pueda evaluar estos proyectos y tampoco hay datos. Y el otro tema sensible tiene que ver con los datos cualitativos respecto del proceso bottom-up comunitario, social. Y ahí eso implica un acercamiento que tiene que aceptar y asimilar ciertos sesgos. Entonces, la pregunta sobre las estrategias tiene que ver con esa complejidad. Gracias.
Muchas gracias. Yo voy a retomar 2 preguntas que tenemos. Tenemos varias preguntas online, pero quisiera retomar 2, un poco porque tienen que ver con la discusión que estamos teniendo en este momento. Nos preguntan cómo puede construirse la confianza necesaria para que el sector privado participe activamente, especialmente, y el sector público, especialmente en lo relativo a la gobernanza y propiedad de datos. ¿Cómo puede construirse la confianza necesaria para que el sector privado participe activamente, especialmente en lo relativo a la gobernanza y propiedad de datos? Creo que hay es un tema grandísimo. Y el otro es un poco reflexionando sobre las condiciones de la región. Cuando hablamos de IA y vemos las limitantes que hay de infraestructura en la región, ¿no habría que pensar en una regulación que incluya también el acceso, el uso y la gobernanza compartida de recursos de cómputo y no solo los modelos de datos?
Ok. Vamos en orden. Primero, es muy interesante, no es estrictamente regulatorio, pero bueno, siendo no un regulador, me interesa mucho todo lo que mencionaron sobre lo que yo denominaría fine-tuning de los modelos fundacionales. En Chile lo están haciendo con el LATAM GPT, que está ahí dando vueltas. En Portugal están haciendo un in-house propio. En Singapur están haciendo uno para la región del sudeste asiático. Y en Suiza están haciendo otro, y creo que algunos países más van a poner el suyo, aparte de lo que hay en Francia, China o Estados Unidos. Y ahí hay un trade-off, como en todas las decisiones de la vida, porque hacer un modelo fundacional es extremadamente costoso y sobre todo es extremadamente difícil de ir actualizándolo, y al final del día, si ese modelo no está actualizado, nadie lo usa. Entonces el fine-tuning ese me sirve de muy poco, más allá de la nota periodística. Entonces por eso es que posiblemente en Chile partieron de un modelo, creo que era el Lama, partieron el Lama para hacer un tuneo del Lama. En Seúl creo que partieron de otro modelo fundacional. En Suiza, que tienen mucho dinero y muchas aspiraciones, están haciendo el propio. No sé cuál es el caso en Portugal, confieso. Si están usando un fundacional y tuneándolo, están haciendo eso.
Mira, ahí te
Tiene
voy a
más
decir,
sentido.
stay tuned, porque vamos a mostrarlo más adelante.
Ok, perfecto. No, eso es muy importante. Hay varias razones por las cuales uno quiere hacer eso. En términos regulatorios, porque quiere que tenga todos los datos locales. Por eso es que, por ejemplo, en Inglaterra están armando una base de datos locales para que sean utilizados para tunear y formar y entrenar los modelos locales. Finalmente, eso es operativo dentro del sector público, creo que es fundamental. No es fácil, es fundamental. La región tiene que empezar a armar sus propias bases de datos. Y después hay cuestiones, como mencionaba antes, yo quiero reflejar ciertas idiosincrasias culturales o locales, o quiero, no sé, que el modelo interprete las lenguas nativas, cosa que no hacen los modelos fundacionales. Algunas lenguas nativas, porque no hay materiales escritos, porque no hay cómo traducir. Esas son cuestiones básicas, sobre todo para mirando a futuro, cuando las generaciones actuales se están formando en el espejo de estos modelos. No queremos homogeneizar todo el mundo, queremos preservar la diversidad cultural, queremos reflejar el lugar, queremos, seguir manteniendo nuestra cultura. Es casi una cuestión más básica de diversidad y preservación cultural. Así que eso es fundamental, creo que es parte de la política pública, nos lleva un poco más acá de lo que es estrictamente regulatorio, pero sí, yo creo que el tuneo de modelos en base a una base curada de datos públicos, creo que es importante, y ahí, siguiendo un poco el ejemplo de Singapur, creo que hay que hacerlo de manera regional. La cooperación regional es importantísima. Esas son de las formas en las que el BID podría, como facilitador, ayudar a la agenda día. Nosotros tenemos que colaborar. Seguro que no necesitamos centros de datos en todos los países. Tendríamos que por ahí tener centros de datos regionales que usar. También con la capacidad de cómputo, como mencionabas antes. Hay mucha colaboración. Nosotros no tenemos el tamaño. Si hacemos los números nos vamos a dar cuenta rápidamente que aunque lo tuviéramos para iniciarlo, no tenemos el tamaño ni la capacidad fiscal, ni muchas veces la capacidad humana para mantenerlo. Y entonces hay que buscar formas de colaboración. Y tiene, en algún sentido, más lógica buscar la cooperación regional que alinearse con Estados Unidos o China. O sea, comprar algo desde afuera que nos deja un poco expuestos a veces a los vaivenes siempre violentos de la geopolítica. Creo que esas eran todas las preguntas.
Eduardo, Sebastián, si quieres complementar.
Sí, voy a ser bien corto respecto de datos. Yo creo que la IA dejó en descubierto el gap de datos que hay en la región, dado que ahora sí tenemos la oportunidad de usarlos para nuestro beneficio y mejorar las escalas y eficiencia, y eso es así. Ahora, dicho esto, es mucho lo que se puede hacer con la existencia de datos actuales. Nosotros lo estamos haciendo acá en el BID con programadores, estamos hablando de texto, ¿sí? Sobre todo en la parte de regulación. Es muchísimo lo que se puede hacer y es muchísimo lo que el BID puede ayudar a los gobiernos a avanzar en esa agenda. Nosotros estamos decididos a empezar a crear bienes públicos, es decir, a intervenir donde el Estado no puede hacerlo, ¿sí? Por ejemplo, hacer tal vez incentivar, estructurar datos para el IA, pero es mucho lo que ya se puede hacer a partir de los datos existentes, ¿sí? Luego vamos a ir escalando y vamos a ir sofisticando las herramientas. Con relación a la confianza, el caso de las tecnologías subtech, es decir, usar IA para mejorar la supervisión regulatoria, es el ejemplo perfecto de cómo se puede mejorar la confianza entre las empresas que reportan en un mercado regulado y el regulador. O sea, eso obviamente implica ponerse de acuerdo en una gobernanza de datos, ponerse de acuerdo en qué se va a reportar, pero eso también genera, ustedes imagínense que antes, hace no sé mucho y en algunos casos sigue siendo así, es el regulador de transporte eléctrico, recibía información de PDFs, de Excel, de Words, y esto obviamente contribuía a esa simetría de información que impactaba negativamente en los consumidores. Mayores tarifas, menos inversiones. Bueno, cuando esto ocurre y empezamos a crear, por ejemplo, un data lake de datos que tiene que sí obligatoriamente reportar la empresa regulada, el consumidor se beneficia altamente y también la empresa regulada porque empieza a simplificar su reporting, el regulador empieza a reduce la discrecionalidad de los pedidos y empieza a enfocarse en los datos que están en el Data Lake. Creo que ese es un ejemplo bien interesante de confianza. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, Sebastián. Muchas gracias, Eduardo. Yo nuevamente quiero volver a llenar ese vaso de esperanza y de oportunidades, porque dentro de las grandes deficiencias de datos en América Latina, probablemente los supervisores regulatorios son quienes cuentan con mejores bases de datos. Y ahí hay mucho que se puede hacer, hay mucho que se puede aprovechar, hay mucho que se puede ir avanzando. Ninguno de esos procesos va a ser perfecto, pero si utilizamos mucho mejor la información que ya tenemos, vamos a poder tanto generar mejor regulación como supervisarla de forma mucho más adecuada. Quiero pedirles a todos un aplauso para nuestros panelistas.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Gabriela Gonzalez from the External Affairs and Communications Division here at the IDB. We will begin our second panel now. Before we begin, a quick reminder, we have simultaneous interpretation available in English, Portuguese, and Spanish. If you need a headset for interpretation, please feel free to grab one at the end of the room. We will now start with the panel, AI and Regulatory Simplification, Deregulation, where we will present tools and case studies that use AI to simplify procedures, reduce administrative burdens, and support more efficient deregulation processes. Please welcome to the stage Cristian Romero, Legal Director of the Productivity and Evaluation Commission of Chile. Silvana Langer, Specialist at the Federal Statistical Office of Germany, who is joining us virtually from Germany today. Bruno Martinelli, Coordinator of Sao Paulo's Municipal School of Public Administration, Municipal Secretariat of Management at Sao Paulo City Hall. And our moderator, Suzanne Dudley, founder and senior scholar of the Regulatory Studies Center at the George Washington University. As a reminder, we will have a Q&A session at the end. Suzanne, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And thank you to the IDB for inviting us all here today. I'm excited about this panel. I learned a lot in our prep session, so this will be fun. Let me just do a little bit more introductions before we go through. So I'm the founder of the Regulatory Studies Center, and a professor of public policy at George Washington University. And I served as the head of the office that reviews all the regulations of the US government before I started the center. So I'm immersed in regulation. And first, we're going to be hearing from Silvana Lang, who, as Paula said, is a specialist in the Federal Statistical Office of Germany, working with a team on the use of machine learning and large language models to improve regulatory impact assessment and the ex-ante estimation of compliance costs. They develop tools that identify legal provisions affecting compliance costs and provide quick, data-driven impact estimates, reducing manual workloads and making legislative evaluation more efficient. And she's going to tell us more about that in a minute. And then we'll hear from Cristian Romero, who's the legal director for Productivity and Evaluation Commission of Chile, or CNP. He's a lawyer specialized in regulatory affairs with extensive experience in public policy design, evaluation, and investment project analysis. He holds a master's in environmental and natural resources law and has served as a professor of environmental law master's programs for the last 10 years. Since 2017, he's worked at the CNP, first as a legal advisor and later as legal director, leading legal and regulatory initiatives to improve productivity, administrative efficiency. And then we'll hear from Bruno Martinelli, who's the coordinator of EMASP. Did I even pronounce that right? In Sao Paulo's Municipal School of Public Administration, the Municipal Secretariat of Management at Sao Paulo City Hall. He holds a master's degree in public policy management from the University of Sao Paulo and has been working with public sector innovation since 2017. He was also a government fellow at UNU eGov, the United Nations University unit dedicated to electronic governance. So a distinguished panel with very interesting experiences. And we will start, the way we've organized this is each panelist will present for about 15 minutes, and then we'll have brief discussion amongst ourselves, and I have a few questions for them, and then we would love questions from all of you. So with that, Silvana.
Yes, thank you for having me. My perspective is on the compliance cost estimation of new laws. So in the start of the process, when we think about regulatory cycle, we prepare a new law and want to know how much will it affect businesses, citizens, and public administration. And I tell you something, yeah, it's more technical, but I try to keep it simple. About the methods that we tested in Germany in our statistical office from machine learning and large language models. If you could go to the next slide, please. Thanks. So just a quick, back again, just a quick outline. I will start with giving you some context on what exactly we do at our office, and then go into details about the different tools that we tested, machine learning tools that we developed, and the large language models we tested. And I finish with some conclusion. Next. So I work in the Service Center for Better Regulation in our statistical office, and I want to just introduce what we are doing quickly. We work for the German government and help them with compliance cost estimation, because they have to do this with every new law. They have to estimate the compliance cost, and we help them if they need help. And we do this in most of the cases. Ex post evaluations 2 years after a law has come into force, and then ask the respondents about their actual costs which they face. And we are holding this data in our database, which is called ONDEA. So we have a huge compliance cost database with thousands of obligations in Germany. And this started in 2006 for the economy, and then in 2012 it was made also for citizens and public authorities. So we are lucky to have huge database on this topic. And we also monitor different programs of the government. For example, they try to reduce compliance cost by 25% in a whole, and they also have this program One In, One Out, which says for every plus in compliance cost, there has to be a reduction somewhere else for the economy. And we also help to evaluate laws. I mean, if laws reach their goal, and if not, what has to make different. Yeah, and also different projects to reduce bureaucracy. So a wide range of topics. Next. And yeah, the focus here is on compliance cost estimation, which takes a lot of resources actually in Germany. As I said, it has to be done for each law, and there are around 200 laws per year. The number is increasing in times of crisis, and oftentimes there's just little time available for compliance cost estimation. So this needs a lot of resources in the ministries and also in our statistical office. And actually, we have here some Pareto principle, which means that only a few laws are responsible for most of the compliance costs. So the initial idea of the AI project in our office was, let's focus on those few laws with human experts, and the rest can be done hopefully by the machine or with help of the machine. Next. Just to give you a little bit of context, because there are different definitions of compliance costs. We have broader definition than red tape. So there are also other obligations included, but it's not so broad as, for example, in the OECD, which entails other costs too. And we have our database, as I said, with a lot of obligations, and also some side information on those obligations, which we can use to model this topic. And we combined our database with scraped legal text from the internet to get a merged database to have information on which paragraphs in legal text imply compliance costs and which do not, and build a model on that. Next. So how is compliance cost estimation done? Basically, it's always two steps. The first step is to look at the law text and to identify the relevant text passage, which change the compliance cost. And then when you have identified the relevant text, you have to estimate the actual cost. So this consists of estimating the number of cases, making some research, maybe asking respondents. It depends highly on if the draft is confidential or not, and how much time you have, if you can do questionnaires or just desktop research, or even just making some assumptions sometimes. So we have those two steps, and so we have two projects, AI projects here, but each of them focuses on one of the two steps. And I will go into this now. So next slide, please. The first machine learning tool which we have takes our training data set. I told you it's a compliance cost database, the German one, and combined with the scraped text from the internet. And we model now which words are typical for compliance costs. And when these words are in a paragraph, then it's likely that there will be a compliance cost change. So that is what the machine learning model does here. I mean, it's like, you can call it like a black box, but actually we tested different models, and a simple logistic regression won our test, and not the complex models like neural networks or regression trees. And so we can really say if this word is in the paragraph, the likelihood increases of being responsible for compliance cost changes. And the model is at the moment has an accuracy rate of 70%, which is okay for the start, we think, because we have just like 500 paragraphs which imply compliance cost changes, but we want to broaden our learning data. It's not complete because it's not so easy to merge the scraped legal text and our database. but we think that the model, that the quality of the model will even increase. And I just have to look here on my notes because it's so small on the screen. We also have to tackle another problem here, which is that there are often cross-references in the legal text, and this is not included in the model yet. So when it says some business, for example, has to document something, but the paragraph refers to another legal paragraph, another law, then one had to include this text too, to be able to understand it. Like a human is understanding the text, has to read all the cross-references through, the machine has to get this information too to be able to learn from it in a good way. And next, please. The second model is, as I said, we have now identified the relevant text, and now we want to estimate the actual cost which will arise from it. And for that, we also took our ONDEA database as learning data and applied machine learning to all the variables to get a model, a good model for forecasting compliance costs. And in the first step, we want to say whether it's below a certain threshold of 1 million euros per year or not. And if it's below, we're going to estimate the costs, and if it's above, some expert has to do this because we do not have enough learning data about the threshold, and it's too important to make. It's not okay to make errors there, and that's when so much money is in it. And this model we have here is very good with an accuracy rate of over 95%. I see that it's the next slide. Sorry, it's very. This is the prototype for the first model, but maybe we go to the next slide first, and then I show the prototypes then. So next, please. I was talking on this one. And here the model is very good, but we want to combine those two tools because now one has to think about the relevant paragraph a little bit and has to think on the variables to give into the model. And the goal is that experts don't have to think about it at all, but just upload the text and then get their estimation. So that would be the next step to link those two models. Now, if you go a slide backwards, I just wanted to show you the prototypes. This is for the identifier of relevant passage. So you load up here your legal text draft, and then on the right, you see, I don't know if one can see it or if we can maybe zoom in. Then you see a forecast for each paragraph, whether it contains compliance cost change or not. And this will make it easier for people who do those estimations to decide where they're going to look in which paragraphs and which not, because we often do not have so much time. And the second prototype is 2 slides more further. If you could go next and then one another. Yeah, that's it. That's the second prototype on compliance cost estimation. So on the left side, the people who do the ex-ante estimation given some data, for example, which is the topic area of the obligation, or what kind of obligation is it? Is it that they have to report something to a public authorities, the businesses, or is it that they have to document something, for example? and some other variables, and on the right they get then their result, whether it's below or above the threshold, and if it's below an estimation in euros. Yeah, and we are now testing those 2 prototypes in our office, and hopefully we can then apply it more broader and give it also to the government. But as I said, we want to make the models even better and gather some feedback now internally first, and then from our stakeholders externally. If you can go next. We also tested large language models, so like ChatGPT, for example. And yeah, the idea here is to give in the whole law draft and yeah, then get a whole estimation of compliance costs. But the problem is that, yeah, it's not allowed to upload this law drafts in the version of ChatGPT because of data security issues. And yeah, so we just ask questions like, do you know the number of cases and possible sources to look this up? Or can you explain me how is now the state of the law? And yeah, not directly asking for consequences, but just to understand the background and getting some specific answers. But in the future, hopefully it will be available another model which ensures data protection. So they're working, for example, on keypads now in Germany, which shall be available to all public authorities. And maybe we can also use some other models, because it seems like the big players, big commercial players, now think about data protection and make some special versions of their models which have that. And the next slide. We've also focused on local open source models like Qwen, Llama, and Gemma, because they have the advantage that data protection is ensured because it's only on a certain server or computer and not linked to the internet. But the disadvantage is that, yeah, it's not connected to the internet. And so these models don't have the newest data and are not as good as the commercial models. But the distance gets smaller and smaller. And so this is something we are testing and consistently looking at. Next. So I come to the conclusion. Yeah, we have developed some machine learning tools on our database on DEA, which we luckily have, and which show promising results. But we have to further test it and yeah, make it improve it further. And we also look at large language models because they are also developing very quickly and showing promising results. But there we have to keep in mind data protection on the one hand, and on the other hand, that we want to have a certain quality in our answers and results. So yeah, that's it basically. And thank you. And I'm looking forward to the other presentations and the discussion.
Yeah, thank you very much, Silvana. That was great. I look forward to asking questions about it. So next we'll hear from Christian.
Thank you. I'm gonna let's start with the first one. I'm gonna do my presentation in Spanish, but the presentation is in English, so it's kind of a Solomonic approach. Bueno, buenos días y muchas gracias a la invitación. Voy a compartir con ustedes algunas conclusiones y hallazgos de un estudio que desarrollamos en la Comisión Nacional de Evaluación y Productividad, que partió enfocado en tratar de caracterizar la carga regulatoria ambiental en proyectos en operación, proyectos que se estaban desarrollando, pero que finalmente, al tener que usar y ocupamos de manera intensa la inteligencia artificial generativa, el título necesariamente tenía que incluirlo como un aspecto importante. Ahora, ¿de qué vamos a hablar en esto? Solamente para contextualizar, finalmente la tarea que nosotros empezamos tenía que ver con hacer un análisis de regulación basado en evidencia. Esa era nuestra mirada original y es lo que nosotros hemos hecho en los últimos años en la comisión. Lo que pasó finalmente fue que la inteligencia artificial, o la tecnología en general, pero en particular la inteligencia artificial, se demostró como una herramienta útil para esto. Y como elementos de contexto, y voy a decir algo que probablemente es una perogrullada para una audiencia como esta, es muy importante y es necesario que las regulaciones sean evaluadas, por distintas razones. Problemas de diseño, pero incluso una regulación bien diseñada puede tener problemas de implementación. Problemas de implementación, de una regulación bien diseñada y bien implementada podría verse enfrentada a situaciones o condiciones cambiantes. También requiere evaluación. Pero hay un elemento que a nosotros nos hacía mucho sentido a la hora de decidir lo que queríamos analizar en este estudio, que tiene que ver con que, a propósito de estudios anteriores, muy enfocados en la fase de obtención de permisos por parte de distintos proyectos de desarrollo productivo, nos habíamos dado cuenta que la regulación a la hora de aplicarse tenía un comportamiento dinámico. ¿A qué me voy a referir con esto? Es que una cosa es lo que dice el texto y otra cosa es lo que pasa en la realidad. Por lo tanto, si nosotros queríamos entender realmente cuál es la carga regulatoria de una determinada regulación, lo primero que teníamos que hacer, y este es el primer paso en un camino que no va a ser corto probablemente, es entender realmente cómo se comporta la regulación. Y para eso partimos con una aproximación que sonaba bastante básica, pero que nos hacía mucho sentido. Quisimos conocer cómo la regulación, o una regulación particular, en este caso regulación ambiental, se manifestaba a través de las obligaciones que generaba para los regulados. Insisto, ¿por qué? Porque la evidencia de estudios anteriores nos había demostrado que entre el texto formal y la manera en que los órganos administrativos y fiscalizadores aplicaban la regulación, había un gap que en algunos casos era bastante amplio y que generaba unos espacios grandes de imprevisibilidad. Por lo tanto, nos parecía lo más razonable conocer cómo se comporta la regulación, más allá de complementarlo con qué dice la regulación o qué dice el texto legal. Ahora, la unidad de análisis en este estudio son las obligaciones. ¿Por qué? Porque nos pareció que era el mecanismo con el cual nosotros podíamos tener el proxy más adecuado en esta primera etapa para tratar de entender eventualmente los costos y los efectos deseados o no deseados que podría tener una regulación. La decisión fue una decisión que fue bastante guiada. ¿Por qué regulación ambiental? Porque en Chile, y aquí pasamos al tema de los datos, tenemos mucha suerte en muchas cosas, pero en particular porque existe un acto administrativo, una regulación, un acto administrativo que consolida todas las regulaciones ambientales que requiere un proyecto. Eso es algo que facilita absolutamente el análisis, porque ya nos da un inventario. ¿Qué quiere decir esto? Que por cada proyecto aprobado en Chile hay una norma un acto administrativo que se llama resolución de calificación ambiental, que identifica todas las regulaciones ambientales aplicables. Pero no solo eso, y esta es la segunda parte por lo cual somos muy afortunados, identifica todas las obligaciones que emanan de la regulación ambiental que son aplicables al proyecto. Por lo tanto, teníamos un maravilloso problema, una tremenda fuente de información. Cuando nos dimos cuenta de eso, la ambición comenzó a tomarse al equipo. Oye, tenemos muy buena información, aprovechémosla. Entonces, no miremos una muestra, miremos una muestra que sea lo más representativa posible. ¿Qué decidimos hacer? Originalmente dijimos, vamos a mirar los dos sectores que económicamente son los más importantes para Chile en estos momentos, minería y energía, en términos de la cantidad de proyectos que se aprueban en este sistema, pero también la cantidad de inversiones que generan. Pero no nos quedemos con que sean varios sectores representativos. Miremos 10 años hacia atrás, o sea, tengamos una muestra realmente robusta para obtener la información. Una vez que nos dimos cuenta de esas decisiones, o sea, ya habíamos tomado esas decisiones metodológicas, nos dimos cuenta que no iba a ser muy fácil implementarlas. ¿Por qué? Porque en estas famosas resoluciones de calificación ambiental, no hay un capítulo que diga las obligaciones son 1, 2, 3, 4. Las obligaciones, como un concepto de el deber exigido para el regulado, que en caso de no ser cumplido acarrea una sanción, finalmente una definición un poco de facto de obligación, pero la definición que le daría el abogado al titular del proyecto, haga esto porque si no lo van a sancionar. No estaban en una sola parte y estaban repartidas por distintas partes del texto, de manera no muy sistemática. Entonces, una vez que habíamos tomado esta decisión, nos dimos cuenta que teníamos que extraer información que no estaba explícitamente en estos textos, que sumaban 1.336 resoluciones de calificación ambiental, y como Sebastián comentó hace un rato, eran más de 125.000 páginas de texto de análisis. Y a la hora de analizar esto, de manera de que ya habíamos asumido el desafío, nos dimos cuenta de necesitamos ayuda. Tengo que reconocer que hasta este momento la inteligencia artificial no era parte de este proyecto, pero nos dimos cuenta que teníamos dos caminos porque teníamos dos grandes desafíos. Uno, extraer información de parte de textos que estaba desestructurada, buscando una unidad de análisis, una especie de tokenización de un parámetro de lenguaje. Eso finalmente es lo que teníamos que hacer. En este caso, una obligación a propósito de criterio fiscalizable. Y eso, eventualmente, abogados podrían hacerlo. El tema es que cuando sumamos que son 1.336, 127.000 páginas prácticamente de texto, ocurre algo que dijo el profesor Coglianese, que es que los humanos probablemente lo podían hacer, pero se iban a demorar mucho, pero ese quizá no es el principal problema. El criterio iba a ser menos homogéneo. Los abogados a veces no estamos de acuerdo con nuestras propias opiniones. Imagínense el grupo de abogados que iba a tener que analizar esto, los criterios iban a ser, no quiero decir errados, pero iban a ser heterogéneos. Bueno, dijimos, la inteligencia artificial nos podrá ayudar y comenzamos un proyecto. Tuvimos la suerte que el profesor Gabriel Weintraub, profesor de la Universidad de Stanford, pasaba por la comisión y nos ayudó en este proyecto, guiándonos respecto a algunas de las decisiones principales, pero fundamentalmente fue un proyecto desarrollado con el conocimiento de quienes estábamos en la comisión. Y lo que tratamos de hacer era generar un mecanismo automatizado y escalable que identificara y clasificara las obligaciones. Algo que extrajera desde textos que están en PDF generalmente, que son heterogéneos, que tienen una estructura distinta y que tienen distintas calidades, que son desafíos tremendos en este análisis, pudiera estructurar esto en forma de datos a propósito de categorías predeterminadas por nosotros. La metodología fundamentalmente incorporó tres fases. Una primera fase, e insisto que todo esto pudo hacerse a propósito de que con distintas calidades y en distintos formatos, la información estaba disponible. Por lo tanto, nosotros no tuvimos que hacer grandes esfuerzos para descargar estas 1.336 resoluciones de calificación ambiental, estos 1.336 documentos, porque al final del día da lo mismo que fueran resoluciones de calificación ambiental. Lo importante es que son documentos que tienen información que no está explícita, que nosotros generamos un proceso o queríamos generar un proceso para estructurarla y extraerla de acuerdo a criterios establecidos por nosotros. Entonces, en la primera fase se extrajo la información de una serie de tablas que están en estos documentos. Y en la fase 2, esta información extraída, esa primera fase demoró varios meses, y en la fase 2, esta información extraída fue clasificada a través de un modelo que fue entrenado para identificar el criterio elegido por nosotros de qué era una obligación y cuáles son los tipos de obligación que nos interesaban. Cada una de estas etapas hasta ahora se divide en muchas etapas, todos son muy bienvenidos a consultar el estudio y todos sus anexos, que son técnicamente un poco fomes, pero muy interesantes, pero que muestran el proceso paso a paso, un proceso con muchas etapas, en que finalmente el ensayo y error fue un elemento fundamental en el resultado final. Distintos desafíos, la heterogeneidad de la información, la variación en la descripción de una obligación. En un documento se describía de una manera, en otro de otra. Teníamos que llegar al ingrediente activo, que es lo que definía en el fondo la obligación. Y ese es un desafío, no quiero ponerme demasiado poético, pero casi artístico. O sea, este es un trabajo muy artesanal porque finalmente se requiere un criterio que unifique el conocimiento experto con la identificación de estos elementos. Esto lo hizo mi equipo, no lo hice yo, por eso lo digo sin vergüenza. Las distintas iteraciones permitieron ir mejorando el proceso y el conocimiento experto, nuestro, pero sobre todo de asesores especializados en esta materia, fueron fundamentales para entender lo que estábamos haciendo. La tercera etapa, con las dos primeras, fue fundamental y tenía que ver con validar la información. Uno, la verdad que los primeros resultados nos tenían muy emocionados, pero el fantasma de que estas fueran puras alucinaciones estaba permanente en todas las reuniones. Ahí la ayuda del profesor Weintraub fue fundamental para determinar los mecanismos más adecuados de validación de la información. Fundamentalmente, comparar las muestras con un out of sample. O sea, no comparar la muestra contra la misma muestra, sino contra una muestra que fuera nueva. Y en esto los dos sectores nos sirvieron mucho. Que humanos construyeran lo que nosotros consideramos era la ground truth. ¿Qué es lo que, o sea, que un humano analizara esto y sacara la primera información? Y que eso después fuera contrastado contra los resultados, en función estadística, por supuesto, a propósito de muestra, y fundamentalmente ocupamos dos criterios, recall y precision. Recall, que se obtuvieran y que se extrajeran las obligaciones, y precision, que las obligaciones cumplieran los mismos criterios que los humanos hayamos determinado. En ambos casos superamos el 90% de precisión, lo que, de acuerdo a literatura comparada para ejercicios como este, se puede considerar exitoso. Y obviamente las muestras fueron estratificadas porque no queríamos revisar todas las cosas, porque si no, no tiene sentido ocupar la inteligencia artificial. Pero logramos hacerlo. Ahora, los resultados puntuales del análisis desde el punto de vista de carga regulatoria, porque este estudio tiene dos conclusiones, o dos tipos de conclusiones. Primero, logramos caracterizar e identificar más de 220.000 obligaciones individuales. O sea, cada una de estas obligaciones, repartida por los distintos actos administrativos, es individualmente fiscalizable. Y cada una de ellas fue clasificada de acuerdo a los parámetros que están determinados ahí. Es una base de datos maravillosa, probablemente no demasiado útil para personas que no están en Chile, pero que está generando mucho interés y mucha emoción en el mundo académico nacional, porque de verdad no es solamente una radiografía, es una foto profundísima de cómo se está comportando nuestro sistema de evaluación ambiental, cuyos resultados son estas resoluciones. Lo segundo es que nos permitió tener, y esto es muy importante porque si no es una foto estática, conocer la tendencia. Y acá, Sebastián lo comentó, yo a priori no podría decir que esto es bueno o malo, pero es un dato muy importante. La cantidad de obligaciones, ojo que estamos contando obligaciones, no estamos llegando a la etapa siguiente que es costearlas, pero contando obligaciones, el número de obligaciones ha aumentado de manera sostenida. Este mismo gráfico, y no los voy a aburrir con eso en esta presentación, si lo desagregamos por sector, por tamaño, por tipo de tecnología, la tendencia se mantiene. Y eso es muy interesante porque da cuenta de algo, y a propósito de lo que comentaba Sebastián, es que este aumento de las obligaciones no tiene que ver con algún shock de que hubo súbitamente nuevas normativas que cumplir. Las normativas nuevas no son responsables de este cambio y eso es algo que podemos saber porque tenemos una trazabilidad absoluta de cada una de las 220.000 obligaciones en todos esos parámetros. Ya, eso lo muestro porque de cada una de ellas tenemos el origen. 146 diferentes regulaciones componen el inventario o el canon de regulación ambiental que se utiliza en Chile en los últimos 10 años. Ese es el objetivo central y ese es un dato que cuando yo esto lo mostré en la primera exposición, había muchos gremios, se generó una risa nerviosa. Bueno, eso es. ¿Es bueno o malo? Yo no lo sé todavía. Lo que quiero decir es que ese es nuestro contexto y ese es un dato descriptivo interesante. Finalmente, como conclusiones, más allá de las conclusiones puntuales de la evaluación de nuestro sistema ambiental y de la carga regulatoria ambiental como un primer paso, a partir de esto, por supuesto, se pueden sacar más conclusiones y ya les diré cuáles queremos que sean. Desde el punto de vista de uso de inteligencia artificial para evaluar o caracterizar regulación, que es un poco por lo que estamos conversando acá, y con esto voy terminando, la metodología nos enseñó y nos probó que a partir de textos estáticos, y en este sentido da lo mismo, insisto, que sea una resolución de calificación ambiental o que se llame de cualquier otra manera. Puede ser jurisprudencia, puede ser una cuenta de la luz, puede ser lo que usted quiera. Uno puede extraer con estos datos, puede entrenar a un sistema para que detecte los patrones que uno quiere que detecte. Eso es algo que no se hace automáticamente en general, pero que las herramientas disponibles comercialmente facilitan inmensamente el proceso para crear esas capacidades y generar ese tipo de conocimiento. Y yo diría que el principal beneficio de esto es que transforma información opaca, que estaba ahí escondida entre medio de distintos textos, entre información que es valiosa y accionable, que tiene un sentido que podemos ocupar para algo. Con muchos desafíos, por supuesto, la calidad de la información, la validación que se tiene que generar, pero que de verdad creemos que es un tremendo paso en pos de mejores evaluaciones basadas en evidencia. Ahora, como conclusiones respecto a la inteligencia artificial, solamente para terminar, y se ha repetido acá varias veces y se seguirá repitiendo, la existencia de datos, la calidad y la integridad de los datos es fundamental. Sin eso, la verdad que todo este motor de procesamiento es como una vela en un velero donde no hay viento. O sea, es muy lindo, se ve muy lindo, pero no nos lleva a ninguna parte. Y segundo, la presencia, y no estoy defendiendo corporativamente a nuestra raza, la presencia del human in the loop es muy importante para guiar las preguntas y después para generar los mecanismos de validación. Solamente, y ahora sí que termino, es que los pasos siguientes, a propósito de esta información y con este nivel de desagregación y de granularidad, nosotros queremos llegar a determinar costos, pero además completar el ciclo regulatorio en el sentido de mirar fiscalización. Y al final del día empezar a entender no solamente la regulación cómo se caracteriza, sino cómo está funcionando y si las normas, por ejemplo, son eficaces. O sea, ¿se cumplen? ¿Se están cumpliendo? ¿Qué se cumple más? ¿Qué se cumple menos? ¿Cuánto está costando hacerlo? Y de esa manera tener datos que nos permitan mejores estrategias de mejora regulatoria. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Kristen. And now we'll hear from Bruno.
Hello, everyone. I will speak in Portuguese, so if you need translation. Obrigado. Bom dia a todos e todas. Sou Bruno, trabalho na Secretaria Municipal de Gestão, coordeno a nossa escola de governo e vou falar hoje sobre o uso da inteligência artificial generativa para simplificar textos administrativos, textos burocráticos. Por meio da Simplificaí, que é a ferramenta que foi desenvolvida pela Secretaria Municipal de Gestão, em parceria com a Prodan, que é a nossa empresa de tecnologia municipal. Antes, queria agradecer também ao BID e à República de Portugal pelo convite e pela oportunidade de apresentar aqui nesse evento. Então, muito obrigado. Antes de falar da ferramenta e de como a gente desenvolveu ela e como que ela está operando, queria falar um pouquinho sobre o contexto, né? Sobre a escala dos serviços municipais na Prefeitura de São Paulo. São Paulo é uma cidade com 11,4 milhões de habitantes, então é uma cidade com dimensões, né, até de países, e mais de 2 milhões de serviços são pedidos por ano, 50% desses pedidos ocorrem por plataformas digitais. E nós temos, basicamente, mais de 1.300 serviços disponíveis na Prefeitura, e 50% desses serviços também estão disponíveis digitalmente. E, além disso, nós temos mais de 130 mil servidores públicos dentro da Prefeitura e também levantei os dados, mais de 4 mil atos normativos são lançados anualmente, né? Então, esses dados são de 2024. Isso já coloca 2 desafios de cara, né? Então, a gente tem uma população bastante diversa, então a gente não pode ser excludente nesses serviços públicos e, ao mesmo tempo, a gente tem muitos servidores públicos, o que coloca desafios para a transformação digital e de práticas de trabalho dessas pessoas. Bom, além disso, a gente tem um desafio de comunicação. Muitas vezes as pessoas, cidadãos, encontram textos burocráticos, termos burocráticos, e eles não conseguem entender a comunicação oficial. Isso vale tanto para pessoas quanto para organizações. E, além disso, embora as taxas de evasão escolar estejam caindo na cidade, 1 a cada 5 pessoas que habitam, né, habitantes de São Paulo, ou não têm educação formal ou não completaram o ensino fundamental. Então, isso coloca um desafio também para que o setor público possa se comunicar com as pessoas. quando a gente fala de regulação, né, embora não seja um especialista em regulação, a regulação depende da comunicação. Então, essas normas, regras precisam ser bem comunicadas para que as pessoas possam entender. E isso precisa ser transparente para que isso possa ser efetivo, evitar que as pessoas entendam os objetivos e evitar ambiguidades. Bom, aí agora eu entro um pouco mais, né, no que a gente tem, que capacidade a gente tem na Prefeitura de São Paulo. Dentro da escola, a escola é responsável pelo Laboratório de Inovação Pública da Prefeitura de São Paulo, o Lab 11. E o Lab 11, ele tem como algumas missões, né, então identificar práticas, métodos inovadores, desenhar e testar e disseminar soluções inovadoras para a Prefeitura, sempre em parceria com as áreas envolvidas, promover a cultura da inovação e também reconhecer e encorajar servidores públicos a inovar dentro da Prefeitura. Então, a gente está falando muito de inovação organizacional. E o Lab 11, dentro desses desafios, né, de comunicação do setor público e pensando numa transformação digital que não seja excludente, que seja mais inclusiva, construiu, né, em 2019, a política municipal de linguagem simples, que tem como principal objetivo fazer com que as pessoas entendam e possam acessar, utilizar as informações que o setor público produz. Isso foi regulamentado por um decreto, depois se tornou uma lei. São Paulo foi pioneiro nisso. Hoje, essa semana, foi lançada uma lei federal de linguagem simples também para toda a administração pública do Brasil, tanto federal, estadual e municipal. Esse programa, ele trabalha a partir de 3 perspectivas. Então, a primeira é sensibilizar as pessoas para que elas tenham consciência, né, sobre a importância de escrever de forma mais simples. O segundo é simplificar documentos públicos e reconhecer boas práticas que fazem os serviços mais acessíveis. E o terceiro é criar conhecimentos e ferramentas que possam multiplicar as iniciativas de simplificação de texto na Prefeitura e em outros órgãos públicos também. E como que nós fazemos isso? Temos algumas atividades, né? Então, nós fazemos workshops e facilitações para incentivar as pessoas a participar e conhecer sobre o tema. Nós temos um curso disponível na nossa plataforma da escola, aberto para qualquer cidadão, para qualquer pessoa, para conhecer mais sobre a linguagem simples. Nós temos alguns guias para facilitação e também nós simplificamos documentos junto com áreas envolvidas e reconhecemos isso por meio de um selo. Alguns exemplos desses documentos, né? Então, nós, junto com técnicas de ciência comportamental, nós simplificamos a carta do imposto territorial. Essa simplificação permitiu que nós aumentássemos, né, a arrecadação em 60 milhões por ano, junto com técnicas de ciência comportamental. Então, isso mostra que a simplificação de texto ela tem um potencial de gerar resultados para a administração pública. Mas vocês veem que os números não são tão altos, né? Então, a gente tem um programa já há alguns anos, nós não simplificamos diretamente tantos documentos assim, a nossa equipe é pequena, isso nos colocou um desafio. Então, como que a gente consegue escalar o Programa Municipal de Linguagem Simples sem depender tanto da nossa equipe? E aí é que entra a Simplificaí. Então, a Simplificaí é uma ferramenta baseada em IA generativa para revisar textos e sugerir edições em linguagem simples. É uma ferramenta baseada em IA, desenvolvida em parceria com a Puede, como eu coloquei, que está em uso desde abril desse ano. Então, basicamente, a pessoa coloca um texto técnico ou no formato burocrático, enfim, o texto que a pessoa escrever. Essa IA generativa, a partir de algumas customizações, ela é baseada no GPT-4, com customizações, então é um modelo treinado com as nossas diretrizes de linguagem simples. Então, a ferramenta vai sugerir uma versão simplificada desse texto. A partir dos nossos testes, a gente percebeu que ela é 4 vezes mais rápida, até 4 vezes mais rápida comparada a uma simplificação manual, e 83% das pessoas indicaram uma maior disposição a simplificar textos do que uma simplificação manual, o que demonstra também um caráter pedagógico da ferramenta. Aqui tem uma demonstração, então a pessoa coloca um texto, está um pouco pequeno, né, mas é um texto com linguagem, e aqui à direita ela vai apresentar algumas dicas. Então tem, por exemplo, né, não usar abreviações, usar frases curtas, e a pessoa pode ir tanto aceitando essas sugestões, gerar outras sugestões, e ela também pode revisar ou recusar essa sugestão. Então, a ideia é que a pessoa não perca autonomia sobre o seu texto, mas que ela tenha um apoio para poder fazer essa revisão. Então, aqui no caso, a pessoa está editando a sugestão e ela vai aplicar, né, essa revisão. E a gente sabe que a IA pode cometer erros, né, então a ideia não é tirar a autonomia do usuário, mas é dar um apoio para essa pessoa que está simplificando. Bom, e aí eu gostaria de falar um pouco, né, que foi até um ponto trazido, né, pelo professor, que é a importância da gente olhar para as pessoas também. Então, não adianta a gente ter boas soluções, mas a gente tem que olhar para a adoção dessas soluções e como que as pessoas vão fazer o uso delas. Então, a gente buscou desenvolver essa ferramenta sempre centrado no usuário, a partir de testes, pilotos e de uma forma iterativa. Estamos disponibilizando ela de forma gradual, embora ela esteja pronta, apta para ser disponibilizada para a prefeitura inteira. A gente sempre faz um treinamento, workshop com as pessoas para que elas possam entender tanto sobre linguagem simples, sobre a importância do uso da ferramenta, e a gente busca sempre promover o uso responsável da IA. Então, significa que a pessoa continua tendo responsabilidade pelo texto dela. A gente sabe que a IA pode errar, a pessoa pode promover feedbacks, né, na própria ferramenta sobre como aprimorar o texto. E a ideia é que elas também não usem ferramentas de inteligência artificial gratuitas, porque a gente sabe que muitas informações oficiais podem sair, né, do controle da prefeitura. Então, por isso que a gente incentiva a adoção das IAs que são corporativas dentro do município. Então, esse é um fator importante. E aí eu coloco alguns desafios, né, pensando sobretudo tanto na regulação quanto da ferramenta, né? Então, tem alguns desafios, que é a escalabilidade dessa ferramenta, ela é escalável, ela pode ser adotada por outros órgãos, mas ela está treinada para o português brasileiro, então ela teria que ser customizada para isso, caso fosse adotada. Também tem outro desafio, que é a gente conseguir medir o impacto do uso da ferramenta. Então, quando nós simplificamos um documento junto com um parceiro, nós conseguimos saber se esse documento está simplificado ou não e medir o uso desse documento. Quando a gente disponibiliza a ferramenta, fica um pouco mais difícil da gente fazer esse controle, mas a gente está investindo agora, né, com uma parceria com a Unesco que nós temos, para tentar medir o impacto dos resultados dessa ferramenta. Além disso, né, pensando na expansão do simplificar para o contexto regulatório, então ela é uma ferramenta agnóstica, assim, né, você coloca um texto, ela vai fazer a simplificação, seja esse texto regulatório ou não. Mas pensando um pouco nesse contexto regulatório, dependeria muito de uma medição da performance, então como que essa ferramenta consegue performar, teria que ter uma curadoria de termos, e também pensar nas estratégias para a adoção dos usuários, para que essa ferramenta faça sentido nesse contexto mais regulatório. Atualmente, a ferramenta está em uso por 148 pessoas, de diferentes órgãos da prefeitura, e pensando um pouco no impacto, né, a gente tem mais de 1.000 cartas de serviço, né, então o catálogo de serviços tem mais de 1.000 serviços disponíveis, então ela pode ser usada para isso, e essas equipes já estão capacitadas. Nós temos mais de 4.000 normativos que saem por ano, né, pegando os dados de 2024, então esse é um potencial também. Essa ferramenta já foi usada para simplificar o Plano Municipal de Saúde, então as pessoas que desenham esse plano municipal usaram a ferramenta para poder tornar os textos mais simples, e além disso a gente tem os cursos da própria EMASP que podem ser usados. Então são assim, alguns exemplos sobre um potencial impacto que essa ferramenta pode ter a partir do uso dela na administração pública. Bom, gostaria de agradecer pela oportunidade e fico à disposição para perguntas. Obrigado.
Well, thank you all. I'm sure that I don't want to hear myself. I'm sure there are a lot of questions in the audience, and maybe let me first start by asking panelists if you have questions for each other. So we learned from Silvana how they're using AI for ex-ante regulatory impact assessment, and then from Christian how they're using it for ex-post evaluation, and from Bruno on how we're using it to communicate what regulation means to citizens and try to simplify that. Are there things that you've learned from each other that you might adopt?
Maybe I can start. I just want to say that I find the idea great to simplify rules and laws and sheets because we have a big questionnaire in Germany on what is how satisfied are the people with public service, and the biggest problem is actually understandability. And so I think this is a great project.
Maybe I'll just follow up with a question for Bruno related to that. And maybe it's just because I wasn't listening in Portuguese. Are you actually changing the law as well as translating it?
no, it's not in use for normatives yet, but it can be used. Okay, for normatives specifically, it's not in use, but it's used to other documents, but it can be used.
Very interesting. Any other comments on each other's?
I just would like to give an example because the Brazilian Senate, the Congress, they are using AI tool to simplify to communicate better the normatives. So it's Senado Explica, the tool, and it explain simpler the law to the citizens give feedback about the normative. So it's an example in this sense.
All right, Silvana, let me ask you a couple of questions. Can you give us a sense of where these AI tools that you're using, where they fit in the regulatory assessment process, and what you've seen as the biggest efficiency gains?
Yeah, at the moment, they fit in the start of the process when we think about new laws and make drafts. But possibly they can also be applied to ex post estimation later on, because our database is not complete, and so we could use this to make it complete. And maybe we have changes since 2012 in our database, but before not, and maybe there's some big costs which are not there yet, and so we could scan all the law and look it up. But at the moment, it's really on ex ante estimation.
Yeah, and I do wonder whether, Christian, some of the tools that they're using, the cost modeling that they're using, would be something that you could use with looking at your ex post regulations to try to estimate the actual cost. And I just add to that, one thing we heard from Professor Carrie Colanisi is the one thing none of us do well enough, and this goes for the US as well, is ex post evaluation and measurement. And it looks like you're all doing that, which is great.
Should I comment? We're trying. We at the Commission, at the Productivity Commission, are focused on the quality of regulations. But in that sense, I would say that our strategic approach is recognize the importance of ex-ante evaluation. It's fundamental. But I would say that in countries like ours, with a huge stock of regulations that haven't had any kind of methodology to be created, the importance of ex post evaluation is urgent. And I would say that these tools give us a good instrument to try to amplify the scope of those analyses. Yeah.
So it's a key part of your overall regulatory improvement strategy.
From our point of view, in our commission, I'm talking about my commission, but I would say that I insist, as you look at the cycle of regulation, and I cannot be more clear in that the importance of ex-ante evaluation, I would say that the conditions in which regulators are implemented are require that even the best designed regulation, even with the best implementation, it's going to face changes, and those changes must be addressed. And I would say that that part of the process hasn't been as wide as it should be, taking in consideration the power that this tool, that this regulation has in the lives of the citizens of any society. Yeah.
That's right. Ex ante, when we do, in the US, we do big, ambitious regulatory impact assessments, but those are really hypotheses of how people respond. And what the obligations, which is what you're trying to do, what do these obligations actually mean? And that's the key part that I think we tend to miss in the US, is looking back to see, once we have more data, how is it really working? And AI can help there. Bruno, and I think you answered this, one of these questions I had in advance, which was, have you tested how your change communications, have you evaluated whether citizens are actually understanding the rules better and behaving correspondingly? Have you seen any difference in compliance with regulation?
There are two dimensions of tests. One dimension is testing the Simplificaí results. So we tested with some linguistic tools to check if it's getting better. It's getting better to give the shorter phrases. So it's really good. But we stimulate the civil servants to test all the documentations. It's a premise of the plain language municipal program to test the documentation. So when we simplify itself, we do this, we test with people, but you have to test with your audience, because if you have an internal audience, it will be different from a citizen. So we do this, but when we have this tool, we will test what we simplify by Simplificaí. But we are not, we didn't test yet because we did not simplify a document to the final target, okay? But some people we stimulate because we train people to test the documents with their audience, and it's a standard of the program, okay? But it's not a quantitative test; it's a more qualitative, more applied, design applied test, okay?
Yeah, it probably has to be, at least at this stage. Yes. Yeah. I'm going to ask one general question, and then please come up with your questions. One of the things that I picked up from, at least from Bruno and Silvana, was a concern about data protection. And I was in Europe a couple weeks ago, and there was a big concern that all the big LLMs are built in either the US or China, and whether that's something that other countries want to rely on. Is that something that you're concerned about?
We are concerned about that because there are free AI tools that are available, and people do not have the literacy, the necessary literacy to know that if I use a classified information of government, I will commit I can have some problem. So we are trying to do this not only with Simplificaí, but trying to upscale the literacy of people about using AI tools. So it's a concern as a school of government, as a management secretariat. So we have this concern in our capacitations and trainings everywhere. Okay.
Silvana, that's something you mentioned.
Yeah, we face the same problems. There's this trade-off. The commercial models are better than the open source models, but the open source models have the better data protection. But I hope that this distance will get smaller, and yeah, that it will be possible to use open source tools or maybe commercial tools, but with better data protection policy, so that the data is stays in Europe.
Okay.
Thank you so much. All of these reforms sounds excellent, right? But also creates a lot of changes within the institutions. I was wondering if you can share a little bit on the main opponents from within, and how have you handled those culture change process within the different reforms that you were explaining?
I'm going to start this time. That's a huge issue. When we present the study, the service that is in charge of these authorizations was really worried. They say, you're going to make me look really bad. And I say, no, we just want to show information. And I would say that that's important part of how you present information in a way that you not try to point your finger, but to try to get the opportunity to improve. And then we learned that they were in a process that was similar to this. They was trying to do this analysis, not very successfully, but it was very, we aligned a lot the objectives. So I would say that at the end of the day, and of course this maybe needs some political validation, but there's a lot of hunger in the public services to improve their processes, but you have to sell well the message, not in a menacing way, but in an improving way. That's my take.
I will speak in Portuguese. Obrigado pela pergunta. Acho que esse é um desafio, é um grande desafio. Nós não temos uma estrutura de incentivos forte, então, para que as pessoas adotem a linguagem simples, assim, nós não temos punições para quem não adota, por exemplo. Nós temos um decreto, mas não temos uma punição para quem não adota. Então, a nossa estratégia é mesmo fazer treinamentos, incentivar as pessoas e mostrar para elas a importância. A gente enfrenta muita resistência, as pessoas, assim, é um processo de gestão da mudança mesmo, as pessoas estão acostumadas a escrever de uma forma há anos, elas se protegem também dessa forma. Então, colocar a linguagem de uma forma mais simples é um desafio e a gente busca isso de uma forma mais soft, então incentivando, mostrando a importância disso, sem usar uma estrutura tão rígida, porque nós não temos esse poder. Então, a gente percebe que existem resistências, mas as pessoas, com o tempo, vão quebrando essas resistências e vão entendendo a importância e até incentivando outras pessoas a adotar a linguagem simples. Então, a gente sabe que a ferramenta, por si só, ela não vai resolver o problema, não vai tornar os textos mais simples sozinha. Então, para isso que a gente adota uma estratégia mais complexa, que envolve todo esse processo de mudança cultural mesmo. A gente enfrenta resistências e também não tem esses incentivos mais rígidos para poder fazer as pessoas adotarem, então a gente tem que ir para uma estratégia mais soft de gestão da mudança mesmo.
Yeah, we took skeptics very seriously in our house, and we try to involve them. And also we frame the system clearly as a decision support and not replacing expert judgment. And we also started with the small pilots and also with full transparency about the limitations. I think that's important.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. And I was going to ask something very similar to Paulo's question. So perhaps just as a follow-up on that point, on the culture and the mindset, how did you face challenges on the skills required and the kind of people and expertise and knowledge that was needed in order to implement these projects? So I think we have also identified, doing some research, that's a big challenge to get people to use this technology to get perhaps themselves into the process of adapting, deploying AI systems. So just wanted to ask about that, the skills, training, and getting people to feel comfortable about using this kind of technologies, especially that they're so new for many of us. So just that. Thank
you. Posso começar em português? Ok. Bom, nós, enquanto laboratório de inovação e escola de governo, nós não temos especialistas técnicos em inteligência artificial, não temos essa competência instalada, então, para isso que nós fomos buscar a parceria com a Prodan, que é a empresa municipal de tecnologia, para poder ter essas capacidades. Então, assim, a administração direta sozinha é muito difícil conseguir produzir uma solução com esse tipo de complexidade. Isso foi um ponto. Eu acho que a abordagem também, né, de fazer algo iterativo. Então, testar com o usuário foi fundamental. A gente aprendeu muito testando com as pessoas. O botão inicial, as pessoas não entendiam que era para... Algumas pessoas não sabiam que era para clicar ali. Então, a gente obteve muitos insights a partir da sondagem com o usuário. Então, isso trouxe aprendizado e trouxe melhorias para a ferramenta também. Tem pontos que a gente pode melhorar? Tem. Então, por exemplo... análise linguística, alguns pontos podem ser melhorados, e esse é um desafio que é geral de diversos programas de linguagem simples no Brasil. Então, isso é algo que a gente pode melhorar também. Outra coisa é fazer com que o usuário, né, então, assim, a competência do usuário para usar a ferramenta. Então, para isso que a gente não solta a ferramenta sozinho, a gente vai lá, explica como é que usa, faz um processo, uma abordagem um pouco mais próxima das pessoas, para que elas consigam entender a importância do uso e façam o uso correto da ferramenta, né? Então, tentando olhar a sua pergunta a partir de duas perspectivas.
Thank you. Very interesting panel. And it's quite ambitious, as Susan said, talking about the ex-ante review, ex-post review. I wonder if you've given thought to being more ambitious and thinking about towards the future, especially, Christian, you mentioned the use of these technologies that take opaque, unstructured information and make it valuable. What about thinking ahead about collecting quote unquote fit for purpose data, or the ways that regulations could be more structured, lessons learned from both the ex ante and ex post review for how, given that our data, our regulations, how regulations themselves could be improved given what you're learning at these two ends?
Well, quite a question. Thank you. Yeah, so we want to do that, of course. I would say we have to take it step by step. Now we are really focused on try to understand getting the best information available and trying to understand how the system works, and then to form an opinion about is this good, bad, and probably what is going to be the opinion, it's improving. It can be improved. But at the end of the day, I would say that what I see now and what is the focus I think we are and the Commission as an institution has is that we open a door and the possibilities are now limited. So we know that the tool is capable if you have the data, but also if you have the good questions to work. I would say now the question for ourselves is, are we going to deliver the best questions possible in order to make the system function? And of course, we should be focusing in what is the best outcome possible with the information we have. But I would think there's still a road to go through before we go to that. But for sure, that's the main purpose. Yeah.
Do others want to comment on that? Then I've got 3 very good questions via Zoom, and we have 10 minutes left. So, and they're one for each of you. So I'll start with one for you, Christian. And it's actually one that I wanted to ask you too. And that's, do you think your model could be expanded to areas beyond the environmental area, and maybe to could other countries adopt what you've been doing?
I think for sure, yes. So I'm a lawyer, so I hardly say yes with this precision to anything. What's your name? Christian? Okay. But yes, and I would say that's the main finding of this study, because it's interesting for us to know how the environmental system works in Chile and how the regulation is working. But I would say, and let me be honest, we wasn't looking for that. We weren't expecting that. We used this tool kind of because we needed to. We need help. And in the process, we learned that all these questions can be used in, and not only in regulation, in all kind of text, because this is a use of generative artificial intelligence focusing on text, and happens to be that regulation is on texts. So it's useful in that purpose, but it can. I would say what we learn is that you need 3 things. You need to have a very clear questions to start. You need to have some experts to help you design the questions. You have to have some very good database, because the data quality is important. And but then the 3 phases, that is extraction, validation, classification and validation, I think they can repeat itself in any environment, regulatory environment. So of course the experts are going to be different in Mexico, in Brazil, in the United States, and the regulation maybe you're not going to be focused in administrative acts. You're going to be focused in jurisprudence, for example, or in municipal decisions, whatever. But so the universe of objects of analysis is huge, but they all have the same thing in common. They are in text, and what you want is to, and I think what we learn is the way in which you can extract information that is not evident, or it's not obviously, or it's not explicit in those texts, and how you decide what you want to look, and then you let the system run, and it's going to give you as long as you design the questions well and you take the time to have all the knowledge that is required, because this is not one button push, and you need some time, some months to learn the system and to be very aware of how it should improve. But for sure, yes, I think the question is it can be open to different uses in different countries. Yeah.
I know there are private companies in the US that are taking regulatory text and turning it into code. And they have a lot of lawyers who can help translate that into the code. And then they've also got the data scientists, the programmers who can do that. And they're using that, then they're using their natural language models to help companies who say, I would like to do this. Would I be violating anything? And the natural language model would immediately say, here are the different parts of the code that you may be violating, and here are some changes you could make. And again, just as all of you have said, you still need a human, but it's kind of a screen. So it sounds like yours is the first step towards something.
No, but just a little to comment. Sorry, I don't know to use the time in this, but I would say that what you say is precisely what I think is the future of this area. But if you see it, it's more than the technology of artificial intelligence or even generative artificial intelligence is the use of data to predict regulatory behavior. And the thing is, it happens to be that artificial intelligence can allow us to extract information that is not structured and let that become a useful data. But at the end of the day, what we're talking about is we're talking about data scientists that they have the tools to extract information in forms of data and to predict the behavior of the regulation or the regulators of the market or whatever using that information. I would say that's the main issue in this thing.
All right, my next question is for Silvana. How critical is a high-quality database like you have on DEA, and what's a realistic starting point for countries that don't have such a database?
Yeah, I think what you can maybe take or transfer is our 2 steps. First, identifying relevant passages and laws, and then estimating the cost. And yeah, of course, you need data, but you can also start with a small database, maybe asking, for example, companies what are the most important obligations in their opinion, and start from that. But of course, the more data you have, the easier it will then be to train a model.
And you use the standard cost model that I think the OECD certainly has information on in order to decide what kinds of data points you need to gather to be able to make those estimates. All right, and this may be our last question before we close. Bruno, the findings that you presented show that AI tools for regulations work best when they combine technical evidence with the lived realities of field teams and citizens. Have you considered turning this methodology into a broader model of recommended practices that could be applied or expanded to other public sector domains?
Bom, in my opinion, plain language can be adopted to other. It's really agnostic. So there are principles you can adopt to services, to regulation, to every kind of public documents, and also to oral communication. So it's a potential too. With Simplifica, it's more focused on text. It's not oral. So it could be, but we are not thinking about it yet. But plain language, it can be adopted to other public sectors, so to other agendas, it can be adopted.
Okay, yeah, we do have time for one more.
Thank you very much. Just real quick for Christian. Christian, it's actually really interesting, your example. You mentioned something that I consider it's one of the key potentials of generative AI, which is to extract the value from unstructured data. And based on the 3 pillars that we as the IDB follow on supporting the AI agenda for different countries, I'd like to ask you, what were the challenges that you faced in terms of computing capacity? And if there were any challenges in terms of the technical capacity of the team that was in charge of this project. I know you had some professor helping and leading this project, but in terms of the team, the hands-on, in terms of the technical capacities that they need to have, did you face any challenges? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm trying to keep it short, but it's a long. No, but what I have to say is that things could be different if we didn't have Gabriel Weintraub, this professor from Stanford. That he was more a consultant, but we have the opportunity to ask questions because this was also new to him. He haven't done this before, but he has a lot of knowledge about how this. What are the main questions you should ask when you do this? And I would say that my team, it was my usual team. It was another lawyer and two economists, and we really and we talked to some experts, but there's really no experts on this. So we take the decision to, and because we have Gabriel, because we were very lucky having an expert on the field, we say let's go through the process together as a team, and let's build the capacity, the capabilities inside the team. And I would say that. At the end of the day, the technical aspect, it's kind of available. You know, the commercial side of this. Every 3 months, the potential of analysis of these tools go by 2, by 3, by 10, whatever. So what you really know, what you really want to have is a clear focus of what you want. A team that is that has the will to learn and to have some errors, but also someone who tell you which those errors are. So I would say that our team was the thing that they have in common, and this is my team, this is not me, that they were very curious and very motivated, and they had the patience, and I would say that was we, as a commission, we brought to the conversation. We have the patience to wait until the process was mature enough to develop the results we were expecting. Yeah.
All right, join me in thanking this panel very much. That was fascinating.
Thank you, Christian. Thank you, Bruno, Silvana, and Susan, for sharing your experiences and for being here today, all of you, and also our participants virtually. We will now go to our lunch. It will last until 2 p.m. and we will begin our next panel at that time. Thank you all.
I think it helped the presentation was there.
E no Brasil